To welcome you on behalf of Blue Star Families, Sheila Casey, the chair of our board of directors, who was to be with us this morning but had to accompany her husband on his knee replacement, so we're sending them our best. Our board of directors, our COO, Nolene Tillman, to our event, Change of Command, the Evolution of America, and the Blue Star Family Survey. This event doesn't just celebrate this year's survey, but it marks 10 years since our first survey, so it's very exciting to us. And we created what we think is a new and exciting event to commemorate it. We'd love to get your feedback about that afterwards. We're bringing together leaders from different fields with one goal in mind: to create a discourse about what we can do to make the lives of military families better. For the last decade, Blue Star Families has tried to bring the experiences of military families on the ground through the largest and most comprehensive survey of its kind. We survey active duty, Guard and Reserve, their spouses, and veteran spouses. We know that real change comes from elevating the voices of those who serve, informing the nation about how to make military life better using data, and translating that data into action. With our partners, over the last 10 years, we've seen enormous gains in policy, public and private partnerships, and programming. We believe the best change comes through collaborative action. This survey, you will see, has been the effort of dozens of organizations, public and private, to bring to fruition. And many of those members, people who have been part of that survey effort, are here in this room today, and we thank you. As we embark on our next decade, we are excited to continue bringing our Blue Star neighbors, the civilians, and our families closer together, working with those who desire to support and empower our service members and their families. Thank you especially to our presenting sponsor, USAA, for joining us in our work for so many years. We are grateful also to our sponsors Lockheed Martin, BAE Systems, Northrop Grumman Corporation, Walmart Foundation, and our media partner, military.com. This is being live streamed today, and the video will be available afterwards, so we encourage you to share this with your staffs or with other people who might find it interesting. The generous support of these folks here in the room makes this survey possible and helps us imagine and action on a better life for military families. To our audience, thank you for being here today to listen and understand. We would love to hear your reaction to this survey and how you plan to use it. I would like to publicly extend our gratitude to the leaders in this room today, or who will be with us shortly: Senator Kaine and former Senator Jim Talent, General James McConville, Vice Chief of Staff of the Army and a Blue Star dad 3 times over, Lieutenant General Nadja West, 44th Surgeon General of the U.S. Army, Lieutenant General Glenn Bingham, Assistant Chief of Staff for Installation Management with the Army, Mrs. Allan Dunford, spouse of General Joseph Dunford, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mrs. Holly Ann Milley, spouse of General Mark Milley, Chief of Staff of the Army, Ms. Kelly Hawkinson, spouse of Lieutenant General Daniel Hawkinson, Vice Chief of the National Guard Bureau, Mrs. Julie Luckey, spouse of Lieutenant General Charles Luckey, Chief of Army Reserves and Commanding General of Army Reserve Command, Mrs. Holly Daly, spouse of Sergeant Major of the Army Daniel Daly, Brianna Keilar of CNN, Harriet Dominique, Senior Vice President of USAA. Please participate. Use the hashtag BSF survey on social media as we discuss. Download the full survey on our website. And thank you for helping us to support our fighting force and their families. I am now very pleased to announce, Brianna will be joining us shortly, but first we'll have a brief video. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Travel back to the mid-20th century start of a standing army, when mostly single men served short tours in garrison or during clearly defined conflicts. Service members, even those few with families, lived in tight-knit base communities. Spouses did not work. That world is gone. In the modern professional military, most service members marry and have children after their initial tour of duty, and their families stay by their sides as they continue to raise their hands to serve. Most of these families live in civilian communities and move every 2 to 3 years, even while troops deploy at unprecedented levels. That makes it hard to know who and where to turn to during times of need. That's the role of Blue Star families. For 10 years, our annual Military Family Lifestyle Survey has listened to the issues military families face. As the most comprehensive survey of its kind, it gives us, influencers, our partners, and you information to drive solutions modern military families want. And here's what our 2018 survey found military families experience and want. Military families want others to know that their lives are drastically different than pop culture portrayals, and that everyone in the family sacrifices, not only those who wear the uniform. Military families want the Department of Defense to share more about real military family experiences, what is exciting as well as stressful. And what is most stressful? Military life creates uncertainty surrounding finances, deployments, and relocation. Military families' financial expectations have evolved. 70% of millennial survey respondents believe 2 incomes are vital to their family well-being. But military spouse unemployment and underemployment increased again and remains the top financial obstacle. Frequent moves without systematic support create military family financial insecurity. In fact, service members ranked relocation as the top stressor for the first time in 2018. Moving means reestablishing support networks, especially finding affordable and safe childcare, something disproportionately difficult for service women. Frequent relocations challenge military spouses too. This year, almost half of surveyed spouses said they don't feel that they belong in their civilian communities. No other survey group feels as disconnected. Significantly, military families were less likely to recommend military service to their daughters. What needs to change? Ending sexual assault and harassment, prohibiting sexism in military culture, and improving work-life balance. But there is great news. Military families have ideas to improve their quality of life. If our nation listens to military families and uses their observations to fix obstacles, military families will have a better future, and we will continue to recruit and retain the finest fighting force on the planet. Blue Star Families is hard at work on what matters most to military families. Whether we're using our annual survey to tackle issues with policymakers and influencers, or connecting military families to their communities through many local chapters, we ensure families are supported and empowered to thrive wherever the military sends them. Join us in creating the future that military families deserve. Visit bluestarfan.org to learn more and get involved. Download the full survey at bluestarfan.org/survey.
Good morning, everyone. It is great to see so many familiar and new faces. My name is Ross Cohen, and I am the new-ish Chief External Affairs Officer here at Blue Star Families. More importantly, Army enlisted veteran. We are very grateful today to be in this beautiful room in such a great, historic, and beautiful building. And so it is my honor to introduce Mr. Harvey Johnson, the President of Humanitarian Services at the American Red Cross. In his role, he has, say a couple words about you, sir. In this role, he has responsibility for major Red Cross programs, including service to the armed forces. Retiring as a Vice Admiral in the United States Coast Guard, Harvey has had an illustrious 30-year career piloting, which included an assignment as Commander of Coast Guard Pacific Area, piloting Coast Guard helicopters in Texas and Alaska, and being one of the principal planners in the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you very much, and it's my pleasure to represent Gail McGovern and to welcome you to the Hall of Service. Sort of a whimsical thought if buildings could talk. As many of us go around DC, we could be in the Mayflower Hotel, you walk in, you walk out, and where were you? I don't really know, but someone says I was in the Mayflower Hotel. Were you in the Red Cross Hall of Service? If these walls could talk, they'd tell the story of the Red Cross involvement and support of military members and families over decades and centuries of support. They talk about how in this room we took the results of the 2017 survey, and out of looking at those results, we recrafted our caregiver support that we're providing around the country right now. These walls could tell you about the members who are here in the Red Cross, who are also retired military members, who just are so appreciative of what you do now for what you've done for families in my earlier days. And so I just really want to have you understand, appreciate where you are, what this means to the Red Cross, and how your support with us working with you as a partner is so important that we reach out, and certainly we help with the survey, we encourage respondents, and more importantly, we take those survey results as much as you do and put it into our programs that serve thousands of members of all services. As a Coastie, I know that that we often get involved in the 5 services. I always listen for that. When you're a Coast Guard, you remember, am I hearing about 4 or 5, and where are we? I've been in one of my most memorable tours I had was in San Diego, which is a humongous Navy Marine Corps town. We were very, very small as Coasties. We were included in everything in San Diego. And it wasn't that the community brought us in, it's because our brothers and sisters brought us in. Every single thing going on in San Diego, whether it was a football game, a baseball game, a host of an event, the Coast Guard was there. And it was all because we were part of this Blue Star family. And so again, personally, I thank you so much for what you do. And I ask you again to remember us as Coast Guardsmen and men and women, and also just the role the Red Cross wants to play, does play as your partner. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Admiral, and we do feel elevated by our association with the Red Cross. I'm now so excited to introduce Brianna Keilar. We all know her as the anchor of CNN Right Now, every day at 1 p.m. on CNN. You may not know that she is a Blue Star spouse. Her husband is currently deployed, and she is a mom. And I'm extremely excited to announce that Brianna Keilar is signed on as Blue Star Ambassador for us. She will help us spread our mission of telling the story of the currently serving military and their families so we can foster solutions in the community where they live. She has not only been an anchor, a correspondent, a producer, but she's also a writer and will be continuing that work. Thank you, Brianna, so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you so much to Blue Star families for what is really an honor to be here talking to you today. And just thank you so much to all of you who are here to highlight this important survey. And last but not least, I saw the media list, so I want to thank the reporters who are here to talk about this and take what we're going to be discussing outside of this room. So I'm actually a little late to the game, being a military spouse, because I just celebrated my 2nd wedding anniversary to an Army Special Forces officer, and my husband was actually in the country for this one, which turns out is key to any good anniversary celebration. You both have to be there to be married and to celebrate correctly. So I got involved with Blue Star families by a very happy accident a little over a year ago, when a friend of mine was supposed to MC a reception around this very survey, and the news called. She's a reporter, a correspondent for NBC News, and she had to cancel. So she felt terrible because she really wanted to be there, and she asked me if I could sub in for her, and thank goodness I could, because it's been an amazing experience for me. It's been so helpful. I've personally benefited so much from the connections that I have gotten through Blue Star families. And when I spoke at that reception, what I knew, but what I couldn't share because it was too soon, was that I was pregnant. And I had just found out about a week, 10 days after my husband deployed. So, finally, I am getting to have this experience. I'm not a young mom. So I was very excited to finally have the experience of being able to be a mom and be pregnant, but I was doing it without my husband, as I was caring for my stepson in my husband's absence and holding down a job at CNN as a correspondent. And I just remember at the time looking through the survey results and recognizing so many of the concerns in there and feeling comfort that I wasn't alone in the things that I was feeling, because I was feeling a lot of emotions. I was navigating life during his deployment for the first time. Also, I was pregnant, so that probably contributed to it. So that was my husband's 6th combat deployment. It was my first. I was really excited to have that shared experience with him because it was something that had been such a part of his life before I came into the picture, and I thought it was really important so that I could understand, you know, what it was he did and what his commitment was being in the military. But I was also overwhelmed because I realized I was having this very different experience from my civilian friends with whom I used to share almost everything in common with. And I have lived in Washington, D.C. for some time. I didn't have to pack up my life and move as so many families do. But even so, I was feeling really lonely. And the good thing was that over time, a lot of my friends were able to adjust right along with me. They were incredibly supportive. And also through my husband and through Blue Star Families, I was able to make a lot of new friends, many of whom are in this room, who had walked this path many times and just could give me very helpful insights, like how excited I was going to be when he came back from his deployment, and then promptly very annoyed that he was disrupting the tight ship that I'd been proudly running in his absence. Now fast forward, our son is 7 months old, my husband is on his 7th combat deployment, and it is a lot to undertake. So, you know, at this point in time, I'm wondering, well, what's the effect going to be on my very young son? He's so little. This is a key time to miss. What's it going to be on my stepson? He finally is starting to get it. And so I'm connecting with these concerns in this survey that a lot of respondents are reporting about the time away from family. I have also felt, you know, in the course of my job and in the course of friendships that people just sometimes don't get it. You know, they don't get what I'm going through in a military family. They don't get what military families in general are going through, because the military is not a casual profession, to borrow a phrase from a fellow journalist, Byron Pitts, who said that about war reporting. And it's a family business. Military families are making sacrifices, big and small, every day, and so much of that goes unseen. And I was experiencing the invisibility of that. What I've learned, though, having the platform of CNN.com and CNN to write and share some of my experiences is that, and I've been encouraged by this, the civilian population is really empathetic, and they're very curious about what military families are going through. And I've seen this on Twitter when I talk about military family experiences, just the positivity and the curiosity, which I'm sure you all know Twitter is not exactly known for. So people are interested in connecting, I feel. They just don't know how to a lot of times, and I completely understand that because just a few years ago, I had no idea myself.
I am very thrilled to announce former Missouri Congressman and Senator Jim Talent and U.S. Army Assistant Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Glenn Bingham, to join me for a discussion about the evolution of our nation's military. And right now, please. And I'm going to So thank you. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
It's a good idea.
We have, both of us, all three of us, been in conversations about this topic, and I know that you've thought a lot about it. So I wanted for us to dive into that a little bit today. And Gwen, I'd start with you. So when you consider the...
Yeah, you're all business today. You're not even saying hello.
You're right. So considering, because we have so much to cover and we do want to let people in the audience ask questions. So considering this evolution we've been talking about in the military, and considering issues of diversity and inclusion, could you share your personal perspectives about societal change, what they require from the military, and what the military is looking to do with it?
Okay, thank you and good morning, and Kathy, thanks for having me here and joining you, Jim, too, this morning. First of all, let me say thank you to each and every one of you in this audience. And Brianna, I was particularly touched by what you had to say. There's not a day that goes by when someone doesn't see me in my uniform and extend their hand in gratitude and say thank you for your service. And that means so much to me, and I know all of our soldiers, so thank you. There are a number of military spouses in the audience. I don't want to pass up the opportunity to specifically acknowledge you, Brianna, too, and all of our military spouses in this audience and say thank you. I wouldn't be where I am today without my military man, my spouse of 35 years, and we do greatly appreciate all of what you bring to us. I think the topic of diversity and inclusion is vitally important. In point of fact, I spoke not too long ago about the same topic in a forum because I think it's definitely two very powerful characteristics in and out of the military. Diversity is one. When I think about that word diversity, I think about a quilt. And if you know about a quilt, you know it's made of individual separate patches and blocks and squares, and each one of those are separate, unique, and distinct. But when you stitch them all together, you put together and assemble an heirloom. It's a product that's beautiful and awe-inspiring that everyone can talk about. I think it's vitally important, particularly as you look about in the context of different events that have occurred in our military. And so at a time in our military where there were racial divide, President Truman directed an executive order that went about and really desegregated our military ranks. We had African Americans and people of color who were serving valiantly, but he made it official by disintegrating or desegregating our ranks. And I brought a few cheat notes so I didn't miss out on some of the things I wanted to talk about. We know from our history there was plenty of resistance to that. Change is a good thing, but sometimes change takes time. And so after World War II, there was an evolution where veterans needed jobs. And so we had GI Bill that brought about that evolution. And I just remember even at a time when drill sergeants were saying, remember this, if the Army wanted you to have a wife, they would have issued you one. And so now, thank goodness we've gone beyond that because we know our military spouses are so very, very vitally important to what we do inside of our ranks. And so that same notion of diversity, the improvements in our quality of life for our men and women and their families is our focus each and every day inside of what I do in the building back in the installation management world. And I think when we do this well, our soldiers, civilians, and family really prosper from that. One more cultural change happened in 2015 when the Secretary of Defense opened up all military occupational specialties to women, where women could serve in specialties that had one time been prevented from them. I think that's a great thing, and so now we see women serving in combat units and combat MOSs, Rangers, Special Forces. That only makes us better as a nation and as a military. I'm proud to serve in the military. When I came in 1981, I believed it would be 4 years and not a day longer. But I tell folks that something happened along the way. Not only did I fall in love with the man I met and married, who was also a military man at the time, but I really fell in love with this vocation called the U.S. Army, and I've been the better for it. And why? Why? Because I felt like a part of a team. I felt included, that other word that you spoke to, inclusion. It's such a powerful motivator to feel like you're part of a team and included as a part of the team. And I think going forward, men and women, as we continue to work together, partner together, team together, our Army can only get stronger. Our military will be the force to be reckoned on the planet. I like to believe that we're in the best military on the planet, and that's what makes us military strong. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Gwen. Jim, you have been a leader, really, I think, in drawing the connection between the strength of our country and the well-being of military families. And I know that personally because I was a member, maybe one of 35, on a bipartisan policy commission on reform of military personnel. Jim was one of the 3 co-chairs, along with Secretary Panetta and General Jim Jones. And really a lot through Jim's initiative and advocacy, you elevated me to being one of the co-chairs because you really believed that having that perspective of the families was not just for the justice and kindness of these people, but because it really spoke to the strength of the military and the strength of our family. And I think it's pretty awesome that you had that perspective. I'd like to hear both a little bit about how you came to believe that so that you advocated to the extent that you did, and then because you have been a policymaker and have that perspective and the work that you've done has had an impact on the NDAA, I wonder which of those changes do you think have been most important?
We all wanted Kathy to be co-chair, and I thought it was a tremendous report. The video had it right. We have a personnel system which is basically, in its basic structure, the same as when it was devised and applied in 1947. It was reformed once with DOPMA in 1980, but it didn't change the basic structure. And the problem is that the demographics of the armed forces have changed enormously, and you all know that, and also the nature of combat and the missions that were being performed and the kind of skills and specialties that we need has changed enormously. And we also have a volunteer service now. When this personnel system was devised, we had the draft. And so what I say all the time on the Hill and also within the department and publicly is I think personnel reform is, of all the reforms that the Pentagon needs, and it's constantly trying to get better, the most important to performing the missions and protecting the country, as well as a matter of basic fairness to people who are sacrificing so much. Now, I think if you ask what's the biggest change, the biggest change I would say is that I really believe both inside the building in the Pentagon and in the Congress, people get this. I think in the last 3 to 5 years, and Blue Star Families deserves enormous credit for this, you have communicated the basic message that we need to change. And so what we have seen every year, both from within the building, but also in the National Defense Authorization Act, the Department of Defense is the only agency of the executive branch that is reauthorized every year. Congress passes a bill every year. And so what we have seen is a process that I think is very healthy, which is constant, significant, but still basically incremental change. Because one of the things we were aware of on our commission, and I know from my years on the Senate and the House Armed Services Committee, if you try and move too fast, if you really try and break the system before you fix it, one or two things is going to happen. You're either going to totally fail, most likely, and we can think of an instance when the Secretary's office tried to do this and it was perceived as too much too fast, or you will end up causing more harm than good. So we've had a number of really good changes, which together I think make real change. So both, everything from the fact that yes, they are doing pay increases every year, to the changes in healthcare, which you guys fought for, and clinic access, to education. It's really great they made permanent the program of grants to public schools that have a lot of, because they got a base nearby, have a lot of service members, to daycare, to fighting sexual assault, a number of things designed to change the system and make it better for families. And in addition, Congress has authorized significant changes in, for example, how we promote. So the services, and they want this, can now move away from this rigid promotion paths so people can have different career paths. We can go for depth rather than breadth of experience across a broad number of things. Recruiting is going to be more flexible. There's a number of changes, many of which we recommended in our report. So what I would say to you all is continue the pressure. What you want to see is every year significant progress made on both, in both the executive and the legislative branches. And the other good thing about this, and Blue Star was really effective in this, it's been thoroughly bipartisan. In a town that is fighting all the time about everything, this is one subject that everybody is trying to do better on. So I really want to encourage you all, but don't let up the pressure either. I mean, stay on top of them.
A good message and an important one. Glenn, General Bingham, one of the interesting evolutions that the Army has been considering is the installation of the future. We appreciate the level to which some of the other sectors, the nonprofits, have been able to discuss with you what some of the implications and motivations are there. Notably in our White Oak retreat, we had some very interesting discussions about that. So I'd love some of your thoughts about to what degree are some of the trends that we're seeing in the survey influencing your thoughts with installation of the future, and what are some of the implications of that move also in light of this change? And you may want to describe a little bit more what that program is for our audience.
Okay, thank you. So when we talk about installations of the future, we in ACSIM are partnering with our Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy, and Environment, looking at installations in, say, the year 2035 and beyond. And what we're tackling is, what is it that we want installations to be like? What kind of services will they provide to our soldiers and families? So one way we did, what we did to kind of kick that off, which I thought was a fun adventure, we partnered with the Training and Doctrine Command, and we actually said, okay, if we're talking about installations of the future, why not talk to the millennials and post-millennials who will actually be using those installations? So we went out and conducted surveys among the 5 centers of excellence across our Army. And the feedback that we got from them was very interesting, both soldiers and some of our family members. And so if you can think about smart cities technology, connective tissue with apps, I would say the #1 by far response that we got was that they want to be connected. And they want to be continually connected. Right now they're talking about Wi-Fi 5G. In 2035 and beyond it'll be 15 or 20Z. But they want to be connected in a way that gives it that instantaneous response. So apps of the future, social media are important. And they also talked about the use of artificial intelligence and autonomous vehicles. I remember when I was a garrison commander, so if you can think about having a bus service or a route service somewhere on a post-camper installation, how about when you pull up on the curb and a bus pulls up but there's no driver in it? So the possibility of using autonomous vehicles to get around the installations is something that they're talking about. And one of the things that I thought was really profound was the use of holograms for training materials and the way that we conduct training. If you can't imagine that right now, it's coming. And you can only just see how that could evolve going forward. One of the most fascinating, though, smart cities technology that's being talked about, and some of our men and women talked about this, is think about unmanned cash registers, where you don't have to worry about carrying cash. You just pull up to a cash register, it reads for your debit or credit information, and you go out without doing anything with paying at the register the normal way that we know that. Many of our service members talked about the use of drones, being able to deliver products and packages via that mechanism. So I would tell you, I think we concern ourselves with the provision of services, whether that's healthcare or services that they are used to receiving now, being able to do that more efficiently, more instantaneously, and being connected were some of the themes that we heard from them with. And so we are moving out smartly about. We hope to have an industry day in the coming weeks, or coming months rather, so that we can partner outside our gates with industry partners who can bring about some of that smart cities technology and be able to come in and talk and showcase their ware. And the idea would be is that whatever we look to, we would pilot it across our military installations and then be informed and receive those lessons learned from it. So really exciting prospects out there, and we're really excited about it.
Thank you. And is there a thought about emphasizing the operational on the installations as opposed to support functions?
In what way, Kathy?
In that perhaps we'd be looking to move more of the support functions off of the installations.
Sure, and I think that's what we get into. I actually brought my partnership director with me, Ivan Bolden, who works with partnerships, because I often have found myself saying, absolutely what you alluded to, there's nothing we do inside our gates without the full support and partnership of those outside our gates. Only 35% of our population lives on the base, so we concern ourselves, of course, equally with that 65–70% that live off the base. And so we want to continually look at the provision of services, whether we're talking about housing, child care, on the base or off the base. It's really a continuous effort. So that partnering with our local neighbors, community leaders is going to be vitally important to our efforts.
We agree with that, and we think that will help create that sense of home in the community. So
Absolutely.
we encourage that, and as long as the partnerships are strong, then that takes us in a good place.
Right, and I think that's really one of the things that we benefited from is those strong relationships and partnerships. Honestly, we cannot do it by ourselves, so we equally look forward to expanding every which way we can those partnerships.
So Jim, speaking of room for expansion and improvement, what are some of the things that we're not focusing on in your perspective, or haven't spent as much emphasis on, that really could make a difference?
Well, there's three things I like to see the Congress do. The first, this is a bugaboo of mine. It drives me nuts that military spouses move from one base or installation to another in a different state and are certified or licensed to practice their profession in one state and not in the state to which they move, so they cannot practice their profession, and by the time they spend the money and the time to get licensed in that state, they have to move again. It drives me out of my mind because it's basically senseless. It's a simple change. Congress ought to put in the National Defense Authorization Act, if you are a spouse of an active duty military serviceman or woman, and you move into a state and you have a certificate in another state to practice the profession, that state must accept the other state's certificate. It's a line, and I don't say it. He's heard me say this. He's heard me say it to governors, because we met with governors, and I really think, I'm not trying to put Senator Kaine on the spot because he's going to be here later, but this is something the former governors in the Senate need to go to their colleagues and just say, you need to do this. This is more important to the nation's military preparedness and okay, end of rant. Because there's two other things. We're not engaging with enough young people. We are not engaging, broadly speaking, the young people of the United States with the idea of military service. I would like to see everybody, all kids 18 years old, whether they're young men or young women, register for selective service. But whatever we do with that, and that's going to be controversial in the Congress, those who do register, I believe, all should be required to take the military aptitude test. Obviously not, we're not talking about draft, but this will engage them with the idea of military service right when they're starting their career path. So they'll think about it then, right? It's a simple thing. I would love to see them, and I think the American people will respond very positively. And the third thing, and I'm so glad you all emphasized this, Blue Stars is basically one of the few organizations that's hammering on this. We have to get more people in the services. We have to expand the number of people we have in the services because we don't have enough right now. And that's why your husband was gone 6 or 7 times, Brianna, because we don't have enough people in the Army. We have to increase end strength. And this is something where you will have a fight in the building because the chiefs, bless their hearts, they understand people cost a lot of money and they don't have enough money and they want to spend it on the core programs and the inventory and the rest of it. But end strength has to go up. Not a massive amount. I think the Army, the active duty Army, should probably be 80 to 100,000 soldiers bigger than it is. And I think all of the services need an increase. And if we don't have that, then you're not going to solve your number one problem, which is time away spent on deployment. You all know what many civilians and even people in Congress don't know, that if you take the total size of the service, at any given time, if you're going to have enough time to train, enough time for people to have with their families, we basically need a service 3 times as big as the number of people we have deployed in steady state missions around the world. And we don't have it. And that's why we have sailors going off for 9 months. And we know what happens when you do this. I'm surprised the force hasn't broken. It's a testimony to the patriotism and dedication of the men and women of America's military that the force hasn't broken, given the op-tempo, how high it's been for so long. So those are 3 things. And I will continue to say number 3 because basically it's not very popular, because it's siphoning off a fair amount of money into people instead of into inventory, but it needs to be said. Thank you. I feel much better now.
Thank you. My timer is telling me time is up, but I hope you do get a chance to talk to some of our guests individually to ask them questions. It was such a fabulous panel, and help us set up the 10,000-foot view, so thank you for that.
I'll be back by the coffee if anybody wants to talk to me. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy.
Okay, we need to keep things moving along so we can get you to lunch and our other panels. If I could bring everyone back, please. I would like to introduce our next panel. If I could have everyone sit down. Can I please invite everyone to come sit down again? Thank you. Can I please invite people to sit down? It is my pleasure to introduce a real leader in our field, an excellent Blue Star neighbor, Harriet Dominique, Senior Vice President of Corporate Responsibility and Community Affairs at USAA, the President of the USAA Foundation, and a valued friend of Blue Star families. At USAA, Harriet is responsible for the organization's philanthropic strategies, her engagement, communications, and leads a team that deploys USAA's charitable investments, her USAA's employee volunteer programs, financial readiness, and education incentives. I'm so delighted that Harriet is with us today. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Good morning. Good morning. Kathy, I want to first start by thanking Kathy and the Blue Star Families team for your incredible leadership and the impacts that you're making. Honestly, I've been drinking Kathy's Kool-Aid for quite a bit of time now. It's delicious and yummy and really does drive so much positive impact. So I want to start first with the thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's absolutely humbling to share the stage with so many incredible leaders and individuals who have dedicated their lives to serving and protecting our nation and serving those who serve. And so I want to just frame the way our brief conversation will go, and we truly do want this to be a dialogue conversation. Interrupt with questions, step up to the mics that are somewhere if you have questions, and at least they used to be somewhere, I thought. But please, let's have a dialogue about this discussion, because when Kathy asked if I would be a moderator of a panel, and I was contemplating and really digesting the title of today, The Evolution of the Military in America and the Blue Star Family Survey. Wow, that is heavy and powerful, and we really want to unpack this, and we want you to leave with information that you can't read in the survey. So we're going to be a little bit provocative, maybe shocking. It might be a little early to be shocking, but we want you to have some information. And so I'll start with first a little bit about USA and the reason that we're here. Then I'll introduce the panelists, we'll engage in some dialogue, and then we'll open for questions. So first, I want to let you know that for 3 reasons we're on the stage. USAA has been a supporter of the Blue Star Families Survey and the organization since the beginning. And the reason that we have is because we have derived so much value and so many learnings from the great work that Kathy leads. Specifically for USA as a business operation, the information from the survey and the information from Blue Star Families has helped us shape our hiring practices, has also helped us shape the way that we invest with regards to the Community Reinvestment Act that's required by banks, and has also played a significant role in shaping the way we engage in corporate philanthropy. So we know that when we engage with Kathy, it is a true investment that drives significant impact. So that's number 1. A little bit about USAA for those in the room. The second thing I want to cover that reinforces why we're here and why we invest. USAA was formed in 1922 by Army officers that were deemed too high risk to get insurance. They pooled their resources and formed USAA, and today we are over 12 million members strong, close to 35,000 employees, and we remain laser focused on taking care of the military community and their families. Our mission and our legacy is the reason that we exist, to facilitate the financial security of the military community. So whether it's our products, our services, or our corporate philanthropy, our goal is military family resiliency. And that's the third thing I'll share with you before we get started with the panel. With the help of Blue Star Families, Kathy and her team, we are trying to elevate our understanding of military family resiliency. With the foundation of the survey and some additional research that they're doing, Blue Star Families, along with work that was done by CNAS and Bush Institute and RAND, a lot of organizations, we're going to define and have a North Star target for military family resiliency and how we can actually measure our investment on moving the needle. Our company invests 1% of pre-tax income a year in philanthropy. That'll be close to $50 million this year. 60% of those dollars go directly to the military family, and we better be able to have a target and measure success. So Kathy, thank you very much for helping us with that measurement for military family resiliency. So with that, I am going to pretty much stop talking because the exciting and interesting ones on the stage are Hasako and Rosie. Let me tell you a little bit about our esteemed panelists on the stage that have so much deep, rich knowledge about this sector and this space. So Hasako Santavilai. I butchered it, I'm so sorry, forgive me. Hasako, she serves as Blue Star Family's Senior Advisor of Applied Research. Her role includes leading key Blue Star Family research projects, including Blue Star Family's annual Military Family Lifestyle Survey and national policy initiatives. So Hisako comes to us with such rich experience and knowledge, and when Hisako forms and shapes her responses, she's going to focus mainly on currently serving in their families and how the survey teases out that information. Now, Rosie Murray served, what am I having problems with pronouncing these names this morning? Please forgive me. Rosie serves as the Director of Applied Research and Analytics at the Institute for Veterans and Military Families at Syracuse University. She works on a diverse portfolio that reflects the range of social, economic, and wellness challenges that assist and affect transitioning service members. So please, may we hear a little bit of love for our panelists that are going to inform us today. And so I want to start with the first question that could be a little bit provocative, and I asked Kathy permission to ask this question. So we're framing this day on the evolution of the survey and the evolution of military families. And the question that I asked Kathy, Hisako, and Rosie is the survey, so what? There's so many surveys out there. What does this survey do that is unique for us? What have we learned over this close to 10 years that the survey has been in place? And what has the survey actually driven? So I'd like Hisako and Rosie to talk about that and frame it in the format of military families currently serving and veterans and what the survey has really done for us.
Thanks, Harriet. Good morning. Harriet, I think that's a really great question. We often get asked that a lot, actually, and what's the impact? Why do we do this survey annually? What is the value, and so forth? So I think I'll preface by saying we are certainly not the first survey to ever explore military, veteran, or family issues by any means, and will not be the last. But I do think that the greatest effect that we've been able to have with our survey is being able to start a dialogue, a really important dialogue with a lot of individuals in various sectors that are interested in this issue and being able to use our data to inform a lot of their decisions. A lot of what we primarily try to understand when we are looking at our survey questions is that we really want to be able to expand the civilians' collective ability to understand our families, both military and veteran, because we believe that the sustainability and the foundation of military and veteran policy issues requires that certain level of understanding. And if we don't do this survey annually, we're not to Senator Talent, I think he left, but his point about keeping the pressure on, by being able to do this annually, I think we really are able to keep the military and veteran families at the forefront of a lot of these various sector individual and policymakers' minds. You can see that in a lot of the impact that we've made with child care and spouse employment legislation, and also just in general, a lot of community initiatives, and then also other military readiness and defense personnel reform that we've been able to influence over the years. You know, a lot of people will also ask why annually? Why annually is because we think that by being able to have this survey at around the same time of year every year, we're able to kind of provide that predictability for families to know this is coming, this is my opportunity to be able to say my voice, and otherwise maybe I won't be able to, I don't know where to go, but a lot of people recognize Blue Star Families as that outlet. Being able to really provide an avenue for a collective effort amongst various stakeholders. So a lot of nonprofit organizations and sponsors such as USAA come together with us and really try to better collect our voices into one, so then that way we can put the survey out and then be able to inform a wide variety of audiences. And then lastly, I think this is a learning process for everybody. So that's, sometimes people think, you know, why do you do a survey? You just do one and that's it. But it's definitely a living document, the survey that we do, and that's why it's kind of every year as well. Just the ability for us to take what we've discovered, really try to digest it and process it and figure out, okay, this is what we've learned, but maybe we need to clarify and better understand other aspects. And so then the following year, we'll take a lot of the knowledge that we've acquired and then be able to continue to ask the questions so that we can uncover things that we might not have otherwise known. For example, and then I'll let Rosie kind of chime in, sorry. For example, we were able to really use this process to better understand connectedness and belonging, which is something that we'll touch on, I think, a little later in our panel. But that, and along with that, we have a really great sample of women's service member and veterans. And so really being able to uncover some of the family issues that impact that community that otherwise, may not necessarily be uncovered. I think because we're a non-mandated DoD survey, a lot of times people will come to us and be able to give us that honest perspective. So, sorry, Rosie, go ahead. I don't know.
Okay, well, I talk loud. I'm okay. That's okay. The one thing that I'm...
Switch? He said switch.
Hello?
Oh.
Technical difficulties. Sorry. The one thing that I will add, and yes, there's no shortage of surveys out there, and certainly, especially in the veteran space, believe me, there's a lot out there. But I think the one thing that I'd like to really stress here is this survey is unique because it does cross around a number of different factors, which really, if you look at the surveys out there, they're focused on one thing or another. And they don't really go off a spectrum of spouse employment, financial readiness, military life, transition, veteran employment, a number of different aspects. So, I always say, we don't live unidimensionally. Our behaviors, our decisions are not just down one sector or one aspect of our life, but across a number of different things. And I will say there's very few surveys out there that really go to the comprehensive nature of this particular survey. Another thing about this survey that very few surveys do is really looking at all aspects, again, during military life, during that transition, and during, after post-military life. It isn't a dialogue that should be just during military life. It should be a continuous dialogue throughout one's life.
Yeah, I agree. If I can chime in just real quick, I think I was at a forum a while back, and I was at a table with a group of other veteran organizations, and they asked me, what do you do? And I said, well, I work for Blue Star Families, and we primarily focus on military families, but I'm here at this veteran forum. And they're like, okay, great. And they kind of just shunned me off a little bit, almost like, oh, well, this is a veteran forum. Why are you here? So to Rosie's point, I just wanted to reemphasize, I think that the greatest value to her point is that we do offer that continuum. It isn't just a conversation where it's military family issues is one thing and veteran families is another. It is definitely an evolution of one person's life in the service. So.
And that's a great point that you're making. So, I said that we were going to be a bit provocative, but did I get your permission? Is it okay to say things that maybe, Kathy said I could, but I want to make sure the audience is cool with that. I'm not going to lose my mind and start cussing up here, but I would like to so things that I've heard, and I think that is so interesting, Hisako. Hisako's representing military families, and she's questioned that this is veterans, why are you here? As a proud Blue Star neighbor who's worked for USA for 30 years this year, sometimes folks ask me, this is a military thing, what are you doing here? You wouldn't understand. And so what I believe that Kathy and the Blue Star Family Survey is doing is attacking head on this divide that we sometimes create because of the feeling of I'm military, you're not, I'm whatever. And Kathy, you've really helped with that. And I will tell you that most of the world is a neighbor, not military, and we have to really leverage the survey, the conversation, because folks want to help, they just don't understand, and sometimes they feel isolated or are pushed out. So Hisako, you both mentioned, I want to key on two things that you mentioned. One, this theme of connectedness and belonging, and some stats that I read from the survey were a little shocking to me. The general mentioned earlier that more than ever, military is feeling appreciated. Thank you for your service, right? I say that, we hear that, and the survey says that 48% feel that they are appreciated, but the shocking stat was 18% feel that the general public actually understands their sacrifices, and 19% feel that the public is aware of challenges. So will you two dive a little deeper on this theme of connectedness and belonging, and what does that really mean?
Yeah, sure. So for this year's survey, like I alluded to a little earlier, we took a look a little bit deeper at what's the difference between connectedness and belonging. And I think a lot of times you'll hear in our space especially that those two words get interchangeably used. But there is a slight difference, actually a very important difference, between the two terminologies. And so for connectedness, what we really defined it as through our literature review is that it's more of a surface level type relationship. So you can have a lot of connections to a lot of institutions or networks and so forth, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have this deeper relationship, this ability to make like these deeper connections, conversations, making meaning of your life, if you will, through which belongingness allows you to do. And so a lot of our families, I think, have the opportunity and the ability to feel connected, but then they are in their communities only for so long and so forth that they're not able to really establish that deeper relationship because that takes a little bit of time to do. And I also think that it takes a little bit of understanding from the folks that are trying to assist military families too, that there is this difference. It's not just, let me connect you to a resource, I'm done, or let me just show you my appreciation, give you a discount, and you're done for the day. It's really trying to better understand the issues and the sacrifices that are impacting them. And that's why I think there's such a disconnect when you say like 42% are saying, yeah, I get that people appreciate my service, but only 18% say that they really understand. And we did see that as a trend. So as Harriet, as you alluded to, this is our 10-year anniversary for our survey. And within your packets, you'll also see there's a trend summary that will show some of the changes that we've seen over the course of time. But one of the things that we really saw too, to the point, is that like in 2009, when we first started the survey, we had asked the question like combined, what, like, do you feel appreciated and understood? And only 4% of all respondents, so that includes military families and veteran respondents, felt that they were appreciated and understood. And since then, we've kind of divided the question into two, where it's like, do you feel understood and do you feel appreciated? And you'll see that there was an incline, but there's still that huge disconnect between sacrifice and understanding. So that's kind of the difference in our opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The only thing I'm going to add is I think that this connection and belonging is a key ingredient to many positive outcomes. I mean, I think that research, I mean, we're taking this holistic approach, and that is a critical ingredient. And again, I think there's a belonging and connection in the active duty military life, but there's also a component of that in the veteran, and I will stress even in the veteran family, which is probably one population that we don't fully really understand more. And I think that it's easy to appreciate the sacrifices during military life, but when you take off that uniform or you're no longer part of that installation, what does that look like and what are those impacts?
Great, thank you very much. So I have about 22 more questions for them, but 5 minutes, so we're gonna sort of start wrapping up so we can let you ask questions, and please get the hard ones ready for them. And so what I'd like you to quickly touch on, we talked about when we look at the 10 years of the survey and things that have gone well, things that we should continue, things that we should stop and never do. In corporate, we think about stop, start, and continue exercise. Through the learnings of the surveys, what should this group know about the stop, start, and continue?
So for on the active duty side, I think what we continue to do and do well, I think, is apply a lot of pressure around understanding military families are looking for that economic security. They're looking for the two income, that dual income life. And so that's not unique necessarily to just military families, that's an expectation. of military and civilian families, but that's compounded for military families especially because of the unpredictability that they're having to kind of go head to head with in terms of their expectations of what they can and cannot do. 70% of our millennial military families said that 2 incomes were vitally important for the well-being of their family. And then spouse employment particularly was again another top issue of concern, not top issues concern, that was, but top spouse employment was, and underemployment was the top financial obstacle to their financial security again this year. So I think that is something that we need to continue to apply pressure on, and then also more understanding and greater understanding around the connectedness and belonging piece that we've alluded to already. And something that we could potentially work around or better improve. In our survey, year after year we ask what are some of your spouse employment challenges, but this year we also asked, so you've told us you have challenges, so what are some improvements that you'd like to see? And what we heard from spouse respondents were that they weren't necessarily looking for any more resources. So I think a lot of times, everybody says, oh, just throw a resource at the spouse and she'll find a job and it all will be well. But what they're really looking for is the ability for nonprofits and community leaders to work with large corporations and to be able to work with collaboratively to be able to find those flexible work options, and the ability for people to really, again, I think it goes to the understanding piece, understand that I have this diverse need. I'm not just this one type of spouse and I fit this one bubble. Really try to understand me and the circumstances around how I need to work. And for the sense of community side, we also heard that too, that the greatest improvement to the sense of community that military service members and their spouses both agreed on was if you offer military spouses employment, then they're going to have a greater sense of belonging to their community.
Rosie, any stop?
I have like 5 seconds, so it'll be really short. I think the only thing that I really want to communicate or get at is that with respect to transition with veteran, I think that we need to really include the military families as part of that. And that's a really critical component because it can facilitate finances, it can certainly help stability and so forth, and community and belongingness. So I think what we need to do better is really incorporate the family into that process.
Thank you. So I think that we are gonna, thank you very much. That was great information, good insights. Thank you. We are going to open it up for questions. I want to make sure, though, that I just make sure that you're aware of the military family resiliency information that you have in your packet. You'll hear more from Blue Star Families and USAA in the months to come. But if you have questions, and I'm sure that there'll be many, crowd control, please wait your turn. Let's have some questions.
Hello there. My name is Patty Barron. I'm with the Association of United States Army, and I always look forward to, thank you. I always look forward to this survey. The one thing that really struck me was the #1 concern of spouses this year is time spent away from your loved one. And I'm wondering, if you dig down a little bit deeper, we can't control deployments. Those are going to happen. Training, that's going to happen. But what I see a lot of is that soldier, service member, staying at work longer, not participating in family events because they feel they have to stay at work longer. Did that come through in the survey at all?
Yes, definitely, it did. So one of the top concerns for a lot of our families, especially service members, was their ability to spend quality time, I think, with their families. So I'm sure it was written a little bit differently within the charts themselves, but the main concept is the quality of life. They need to be able to they want to be able to spend time with their families. They're concerned about the impact of deployments that it has on their children. And so I think that definitely did come through for the service member side as well.
Hey, I'm Nathan Naylor with Philips North America, and I have a question about, as VA and DoD are merging their electronic health records, which is great for warfighters and veterans, what about family members like my wife, who was a military brat, came up in the DoD schools and received all of her medical care from DHA until she came of age and then had to roll off the plan. What happens to all those kids and family members when VA picks up care for that military member, but the family is now no longer receiving care in the same facility with the same doctors as the warfighter?
That's a very good question. I unfortunately don't have a response for you, unfortunately, but if you give me your business card, I could definitely take a look at it and respond back appropriately, unless Rosie has something else to add.
Hi, my name is Marisa Alford. I'm a military spouse and I'm also an entrepreneur. We were abroad for 7 years. I came home for 3, and I have been using every resource I can to get my business up and going. We found out that we will probably be PCSing this summer again to Germany. So my question is, I feel like I'm leaving my tribe. I've had so many resources here. I'm actually a VYS grad, so thank you for that opportunity. But I feel like I'm losing resources and kind of my tribe. And I know when you're abroad, there are a lot of restrictions as to what you can do business-wise, using the mail office. Was there any information that came through on the survey about entrepreneurs and spouses trying to work or have their own business while they're abroad?
So I think that is definitely one of the ways that a lot of military spouses try to provide that flexibility to a lot of the issues that come with PCSing and a frequent relocation. In terms of what came through on the entrepreneurship within the survey itself, we didn't necessarily ask questions in that way, so we didn't have any data per se, but we have looked over the past few years about and asked that question more openly. And I think a lot of people do experience similar barriers. There's a lot of, again, resources out there that help you navigate through how do I continue to facilitate my business once I'm abroad. I'd be happy to connect you to our careers program manager, and she may be able to assist you a little bit more in the available resources there, or Rosie.
Yeah, no, the only thing I will add, yeah, definitely, I think abroad adds a level of complexity, especially in the entrepreneur realm. But one thing that I will say, and again, as evolution, as time has changed, technology has absolutely helped with accessibility of certain resources. And there are resources, and happy to have a conversation with you specifically about that, especially when abroad as an entrepreneur, so.
Hi, Allan Dunford. I actually have kind of a two-piece thing here. The survey results talk about the perceptions of military spouses, that they feel like they're not understood by the civilian counterparts. Interestingly, though, perceptions are about what you think. They're not a measurement. So that may lead to some further investigations to why do they feel that way. Because if you look at scientific research, a perception is not a valuable piece of information necessarily. It doesn't lead you to why people feel that way or exactly. The other thing is that our military families have very different experiences during their time in service. I am now meeting families who have been in for 4 years and the service member has never deployed. They've gone to cold weather training, they've gone to specialty schools, but they've never deployed to a combat zone. They've never done a deployment longer than 2 or 3 months. So you have some very, very different experiences, which of course affect those perceptions. And a part of that concern about what people say they perceive about the civilian population is, they have to explain what they think those people should know. You can say they don't understand me, but unless you can describe what it is that those people need to know about you, that's not a useful it's not a useful thought. You can say, my husband doesn't understand me, but in marriage counseling, you have to dig down and say, well, why? What gives you that impression? What is it that he doesn't understand? Blah, blah, blah. The same thing with our military families. Before you can address this disconnect, you have to find out, what do you expect them to know about you? Is that a realistic expectation? I mean, I've never been married to a plumber. I don't know what it's like to get calls in the middle of the night to go off and my furnace is out and he's out fixing somebody else's furnace. So to a certain extent, families need to be able to quantify exactly what it is that somebody needs to know about their experience to make them have a better understanding. And if you can't do that, how are you going to expect somebody to understand your situation? So that may be a survey question for next year.
If we can address that real quick, actually. So that is a very good point and a very good question, a suggestion as well. So year after year, we have been asking the same question, you know, do you feel the general public understands your challenges, your sacrifice, so forth? And so this 2018 survey, we decided that we needed an open-ended question because we don't actually know all the specific, tangible reasons why we could have listed it out in a kind of click one suggestion kind of way. And so that's why we oftentimes use an open-ended response to explore those options. So we allowed respondents an opportunity to kind of describe what it is that they wanted the DoD, specifically the DoD, to do to be able to better expand the civilians' understanding of military families. And although that may be a little bit different from what you were suggesting, the number one thing that people wanted was that they just wanted the DoD to better explain that the sacrifice is borne by all families. So I think, you know, the DoD did a good job with the Know Your Mill campaign, and oftentimes I think what military spouses took away from that is it's great, like everybody gets to know what my service member is doing better and so on and so forth, but not necessarily that sacrifice is borne by all members of the family.
Thank you for closing out with such a great question. Thank you for your time and interest, and Kathy, thank you again for what you do for our world. Awesome job, panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, panel, and I am so excited to invite Jamal Simmons up here from The Hill TV, a proper moderator to take over my duties now that he's available to us. Come on up, Jamal.
Good morning. Good morning. Anybody else here? I know you guys have been at this for a while. We're going to get to a short panel we're going to do now, and then we're going to have lunch. So if you're angling to eat, it's coming. Don't go anywhere. I just want to tell you a short story before we get started, though. I want to kind of take you back to a place in Putnam County, Georgia, April 1899. It's a dark night. Family, man, his wife, 16-year-old son, and their 3-year-old son are in the house doing what families do at a night in a dark place. When they start to hear voices, those voices are the sound of a group of white men coming up the hill in their town. In that house is my great-grandfather, who was a 16-year-old, and those men are looking for a young man who is suspected of having killed a white man in town. His father walks outside with a shotgun and is able to stop those men from coming into the house and taking his son, who they suspected of being this person. He was not the person. This is the largest manhunt in Georgia history, which resulted in a lynching. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, within a week, shows up in Macon, Georgia, where he joins the U.S. Army, 10th Cavalry, Troop K, and shipped off to Cuba. The end of the Spanish-American War, becomes a Buffalo Soldier. The U.S. Army literally saved my family's life. We would not be here if it were not for his ability to get out of that town, get out of that state. He left, came back, ended up in Detroit, Michigan, where I was born. So when I think about the military, I think about this debt that my family has to the military. I think about the people that I've worked for in my political career, people like Max Cleland, who was in the United States Army, which I think a lot of you know. People like General Wesley Clark when he ran for president, and I was his press secretary, a lot of people know. And the woman that I'm about to introduce now, I think about it then, because when I worked for Wes Clark, I met a woman named Gert Clark, who everyone called the General's General. And she was the one in charge of making sure the families were taken care of under his command. So I know from them, not from my own experience, but from some of the people I had the honor to work with, I know the importance that military families play in keeping the men and women who serve our country capable and ready to be able to do that important job. So I want to thank you all for having me here. It's an honor to be here. Allan Dunford is the daughter of a World War II veteran, a Marine Corps spouse, and wife to Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph F. Dunford. She is a physical therapist and practiced for nearly 30 years. Her active online and in-person presence is a very real example of leadership and grace for the military community. We are fortunate to have her here today, and I gotta say, sitting at the table with her, she's kind of a hoot, so, you know, you guys be careful. I don't know what she may say when she gets here. So, Ellie, come on up. This is your job now.
Hi, everybody. I have to say that as I look out, there's so many people that I recognize. It's like Old Home Week with so many organizations that year after year come out to support Blue Star families and the many other organizations that meet in this region to try and create a better life for our military families and our veterans. And one of the really important things that you know, I hope you all get out of this is that this Blue Star Family Survey is going to help us, instead of creating a program and trying to fit our families into it, it's going to help identify the needs and desires of our families so that we can build more appropriate programs to fit those needs. There's a big difference. So thanks to Kathy and all of the staff for what they're doing. As Jamal said, I'm Allan Dunford. I'm a proud military spouse. We just had our 34th anniversary, so I guess we're long-timers. I get to see firsthand, and I'm very grateful for the sacrifices that our military families and our service members make every day. Thanks to research like Blue Star Family's annual military family lifestyle survey, we get to know the stories and experiences of our service women included in those surveys, that they're vastly different than what their male counterparts may experience. So please welcome to the stage Kayla Williams, who's Senior Fellow and Director of the Military Veterans and Society Program at the Center for a New American Security, CNAS, Senior Vice President of Military and Veterans Affairs at Comcast Universal, retired Army Brigadier General Carol Eggert, and the 44th Surgeon General of the United States Army and Commanding General of U.S. Military Command, Lieutenant General Nadia West, for an illuminating discussion about women in uniform. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for that very warm introduction. I really appreciate it. And thank you all so much for joining us today to discuss the differing experiences of women in uniform. I'm incredibly honored today to facilitate a discussion about that topic with two incredibly inspiring women leaders. If I spent my time up here going through their full bios, we wouldn't get to the questions at all, so I will be very brief. Brigadier General retired Carol Eggert, who is now Senior Vice President, Military and Veteran Affairs at Comcast NBC Universal, where she provides strategic leadership on military engagement and hiring, corporate social responsibility efforts, and business development. Carol's Army career included numerous overseas deployments, including a 15-month OIF tour as Chief of the Women's Initiatives Division and Senior Liaison to the U.S. Embassy, Baghdad. Also joining me is Lieutenant General Nadia West, 44th Surgeon General of the United States Army and Commanding General of U.S. Army Medical Command. General West holds the distinction as the highest-ranking female graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, where she earned a Bachelor of Science degree in engineering. She also earned a Doctorate of Medicine degree from George Washington University School of Medicine. Thank you so much for both being here today. I'll be directing questions to you individually, but please feel free to jump in if you have something to say.
Do be mindful of the time, since we don't have nearly enough to go through all of these fascinating questions. So the role of women in uniform has changed significantly in the past few decades. The Blue Star Families survey results continue to highlight the need to better understand the differing experiences of male and female service members in order to recruit top talent, address military readiness needs, and support successful transitions to civilian life. General Eggert, can you start us off by talking about some of the most significant changes for women in uniform that you saw or personally experienced during your military career?
Well, how far back do you want to go? I joined in 1972, the Women's Army Corps. At the time when I joined, women were required to wear lipstick. We were required to wear hose at all times. We did have physical fitness, but it was in starched skirts, which you were not allowed to wrinkle. We were not issued weapons. So that's your baseline there. And I have seen incredible changes, and I am so pleased that I've been able to witness those changes throughout the years, certainly starting with in 1976 when women were integrated into the all-volunteer force. That's a critical thing to understand, are those transition points, and we'll continue to have those transition points, and we're having one now as women are brought into all the combat career fields. And General Bingham mentioned the resistance as African Americans were brought into the military. We're going to face those same resistant points. And it takes our leaders to break down those barriers. One thing that I've learned since I've been out in the private sector for 3 years is that the private sector, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, tends to try to change hearts and minds first. You know, why is it important that we have a diverse organization? Where I'm so proud of the military, we don't start there. We start with regulations and changing behavior, knowing that hearts and minds will follow. Now, one thing I think the private sector does really well is that we look for diversity of thought, diversity of background, and we build diverse teams so that we have a multiple way to approach problems. And I don't know that we really emphasize that in the military. So, short answer is lots of changes, and I'm so pleased they happened during my time in the service.
Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I just was smiling when you mentioned that you were WAC, because 3 of my sisters were WACs. My sister was a WAF, one of them in the Air Force, and my next youngest to me sister started in the Navy just as they were transitioning. And so I watched this as a young girl growing up, and then to be able to have the opportunity, like in 1976 when they started integrating women into service academies, to be able to take advantage of that opportunity, just the timing of all the things that Carol and her team did to usher in. So that's awesome. Appreciate what you did. Thank you for trailing, blazing the trail for us all. That's awesome.
You're welcome, man. And the same thing.
This year's survey results also indicated that quality of life is increasingly important for service members in general, and especially for female service members. General West, what do you see as viable personnel management strategies or initiatives that would support the recruitment and retention of talented female service members, especially those who are concerned about their quality of life?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think first, the overarching, as an all-volunteer force, we really need to make sure we have strategies to recruit highly qualified, young people or people of any age that are able to serve our nation, to do what the Army and the military is for, to make sure that we can protect our nation. So we need an entire force, men and women. I think the focus is also important to be on the generation that we're looking at to recruit. A lot of the strategies I think that will definitely recruit talented women and men is the understanding of what the millennial age young people of today's recruiting population really are looking for in careers. Longevity, are they looking for stability? We see in the civilian sector that they don't necessarily stay with an organization for 30 years like maybe our parents did. And also, how do we make sure that there's interest out there? I guess the diversity of occupational specialties or things that they can do to keep them interested and want to stay in. Particularly for women, I think it's what I think that we can do to help recruit is to ensure that there's an educational campaign to allow women and all to understand what's available in the services. So that's one strategy, I think, is to make sure we really identify what are the occupational specialties that you can join. Having a mentoring program where they can talk to women that have gone through to determine what are some of the issues, the challenges. Because I think the education, having eyes open wide of understanding what you're joining and what you're signing up for is really going to be helpful. Then also, and starting earlier on in a young person's life cycle. High school, I think you're kind of late. Starting in grade school to say, here's an opportunity to serve, know your military, kind of the comments that were made previously, understand what your military is, what it's for, how to prepare so you can have options to join as well.
Thank you so much.
All right, as the president would say, I have already given you fake news. We are not gonna have lunch right now. We've got one more thing to do and then we're gonna have lunch. That is real news. Where do we go from here? How do we create and implement policy that addresses the reality of military families and military service? How can we further standardize policy requirements that impact military families and improve their quality of life? Our next panel will dive into defense policy implications informed by the 2018 BSF survey. Please welcome your moderator, Vice President for Communications at the Bipartisan Policy Center, David Lapin. Tell me, what is it? LePan. That was the other one I was going to go with. Okay, David LePan's coming up. Retired Marine Corps Colonel David LePan, Senior Executive in the Office for the Undersecretary of Defense and Personnel for Personnel and Readiness, retired Navy Rear Admiral Tony Curta, and John Mebbe from the Department of Veterans Affairs. All right, thanks. Have a good panel.
All right, thanks to Kathy and Blue Star Families for inviting me. Sure, give the Marine the 15-minute panel right before lunch. No problem. But we'll get through this quickly, but informatively. The first thing we're going to do, though, with introductions is make them brief, because if we went through Tony's current title, that would take half the time we have allotted. So suffice to say that my two panelists have between them about 7 decades of service in and out of uniform. Tony is a retired Navy Rear Admiral and has been with the Department of Defense since retirement, and so again, more than 4 decades of service in and out of uniform. And he is, again, without going into his actual title, in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. So this is right up his alley. John Mebbe is, again, a retired Army officer. So between the three of us, you have 3 of the 5 services represented. He is in the Office of Policy and Interagency Collaboration at the Department of Veterans Affairs. So again, our panel will dig into some of the survey results as it applies to policy making both within DoD and the VA. So again, in an effort to go through this rapidly, let me start with Tony, and I'm going to give him a 3-part question. So how does the Blue Star Family annual survey data and the information that comes from it assist OSD, the Office of Secretary of Defense, in policy decision making, particularly with regard to military personnel policy? The second piece is how is the Blue Star Family survey work similar or complementary to the work that OSD does with its own surveys of military spouses and service members? And the third is, how do these surveys writ large, the ones that DoD and the services do, the ones that Blue Star Families contribute, how does that add to the body of knowledge that assists with policy making, especially in military personnel and family policy?
Well, thanks, Dave, for that, and Kathy, thanks for inviting me back. I've been involved in the rollout of these before, And I think the reason I keep coming back, one, because Kathy invites me, but two, because I think it's very important to the Department of Defense as we gather these surveys and understand what they mean. Nothing is more important to us than the all-volunteer force, and by that word volunteer, we have to recruit and retain a force that meets our needs to provide for the defense of the nation, but also it's important to us to attract and retain a force that looks like the population that we serve. And that is always important to us as we look into the future. And so every year we bring in about 250,000 new members, so we have to recruit them, and we probably retain just that number, if not more. So we have to bring them in, and then we have to keep them. And in order to do that, you have to know what they're thinking. And that old maxim of, recruit a sailor, a little biased there, but recruit a sailor, but retain a family, is always important. So it's not only important to us to know what the service members themselves are thinking, but obviously what the spouse is thinking and what those families are thinking. And we use a variety of instruments. We have, within DoD, our status of forces surveys, our active duty spouses surveys. We have the warrior survey that is done that helps us. And then we have a health-related behavior survey, and then we have the Blue Star Family Survey. And they all just kind of paint a palette for us, a comprehensive picture that allows us to understand what our service members, their families, and their spouses are thinking. And I think one of the ways to indicate why it's important to have that different perspective is we look at this year's Blue Star Family Survey, and you see that 35% of the respondents, indicate that military pay and benefits is a significant concern. And so if you just look at that, you might say, well, okay, wow, we have to really look at what we're paying people, what does that mean? Well, we add it to one of our survey instruments, and we find out that the number one reason that service members tell us that they stay in is because of the military pay and benefits. And so you add that together, and what is the picture that you have? Well, the picture you have is, maybe, at least what I take from it is, overall, we're doing pretty well in attracting and retaining our talent with respect to what we pay, the military pay and the benefits, overall. But there's some gaps there, and we need to understand them if the BSF survey, the Blue Star Family Survey, is telling us that it's a significant concern. So we still have kind of work to do in that area. And that's why taking all of these surveys together, you can get a much more nuanced position as to what we need to do in the policy arena to address the concerns of service members, spouses, and their families. And the way that we do that, we take all of these surveys, of course, and one of the helpful reasons I think that they're annual surveys is because every year, as was mentioned earlier up here, we have to go back to the Congress and we get our budget for the year. And so the question is, every year, there's only so many resources, where do you put them? Is it on a larger than normal pay raise? Is it in more basic allowance for housing? Is it in more money for child development centers and people that work in the child development centers? Is it more money for the investigation system that allows us to hire them? So all of these decisions that are made every year are very important because, again, we have to attract and retain those people. And the Blue Star Family Survey is just another piece of what we absolutely rely on every year in understanding where we need to put those resources to contribute to our mission, which is to sustain the all-volunteer force.
Great, thanks, Tony. So John, a little different perspective from the VA side. Obviously, the VA doesn't touch every single veteran the way DoD touches every service member and families. So can you talk about how the VA, either through these external surveys like Blue Star Families or through surveys that the VA does itself, takes that data and information and helps with policy making for veterans and their families?
Yeah, and first of all, thanks, Kathy, for inviting me. And one of the things that I was pleased to see is we started to ask questions about veterans because we do have some survey methods that capture some veteran data, but this helps us both either augment data that we don't have or confirms or disproves some other things that we thought we knew. So that's, and we ensure that this particular survey is spread out through the department in both the healthcare and the benefits side to ensure that they're informed as they go through their systems.
And just to pick up on that too, John, I know that in your work, you're part of that transition of service members from active service, moving into veteran status. And so a survey that looks at what active duty service members and their families think, how does that help you as you're responsible for that transition to veteran status?
So I've been at the VA now for 8 years, which is a third of the time that I spent on active duty. One of the biggest sea changes has been an appreciation that there's a life cycle. And when I first came in, essentially when you were done with your service, nobody really thought about what comes later. And the biggest sea change is when we went through and re-engineered the transition assistance program, because we stepped back and we took a holistic view, because the recognition was we're serving the same people just at different parts of their life. And I don't know if you've been on the VA website, but we do have a veteran's journey map that lays out from time of session to time of death, all the key points in life. And we've brought on board a digital service team that is really engaged with veterans and service members to see what is the best way to approach them with how we do outreach and get them into the system. And so, and Kathy, I'll send you this, the link to our Welcome to VA. And we've taken that life cycle and we've tied it to the applications for benefits and services to really make it much more easier for people to navigate the Byzantine world of VA benefits and services. So that's, I think, has been a huge plus. The second thing is that there's a recognition that a lot of things that inhibit the efficient and effective working of VA and D2D together is the fact that our legislations are oriented by department. And so simple things like caregivers, where on the DoD side there's one set of standards, and then we had to essentially jerry-rig the transition over on the veteran side to ensure that somebody that had a caregiver while they were in uniform was able to have a caregiver the day after they separated.
Tony?
Well, I just wanted to there we go. I just wanted to add that one element of the survey that is probably maybe least appreciated is as our service members transition out of the military and over to DoD, it's very helpful for us to know what their concerns are, why they're leaving, and what their stressors are. Because we work very hard with the VA to identify the needs of departing service members, not just jobs and the job is the number one thing that we can help people with when they're leaving, but also what are their counseling and medical needs. And these surveys, like the Blue Star Family Survey, allow us to identify those and work much closer with the VA and design that transition assistance program and the VA services to understand and provide what is needed. A successful transition from life as a service member and that family to their Veterans Affairs status is not only important for the compact that we have with our service members, but it is vitally important to us as we need people to continually tell whether it's their children or their people in their schoolmates, the influencers, the coaches, the chaplains, the counselors, to recommend military service. And if we're not taking care of our people as they transition from DoD into their veteran status, then we have no hope of the next generation of bringing them out on board.
Okay, we have time for one audience question. I see a lady with her hand in the back. Oh, and there's a microphone right there, perfect.
Hi, I'm Krystal Cornwall with the Safe Military Housing Initiative. What are the DoD's plans to eliminate or address the privatized housing problem?
Well, good question, and I don't have a sound bite for that. I would just tell you this: the surveys like this that talk about the housing and the issues that accompany the privatized housing system that we have. I can tell you that the senior reaches of the Department of Defense are seized with the current stories we have and the experiences that our service members and their families are having with housing. It was a decision some number of years ago to go to this model. We're trying it out. There's certainly been growing pains, and it's not uniform across the country. In some areas, the model is working incredibly well, and we have very high standards and great housing that's provided to our service members and their families. But we know that there are pockets where that success is not everywhere, and we have those issues. And I believe that feedback to the folks that run that department in DoD is ongoing, and I know as we address those budget areas, ensuring the success of our privatized housing is top of that list.
Can you tell me where the areas are where it's successful?
So housing is not my portfolio, so I can't tell you where that necessarily is. I mean, I can't go region by region, and I just don't have that information, but I'm happy to take that question back and give an answer to you.
Okay, thank you. One last thing before I get the hook. Kathy mentioned earlier, along with Senator Talent, the report, the bipartisan work that was done by the Bipartisan Policy Center back in March of 2017, what we refer to as the FAST report. And so we'll make sure that everybody has a link to that, and we can get that back in front of people, because it has been a couple of years, so it's good to refresh that. So thanks again. And thank you all, and enjoy your lunch.
To introduce up our new panel. So thank you. That was very orderly. This is like, military precision. We've been at war for a long time. You guys know that more than anybody. We will have children born this year who will join the military who were born after 9/11. How do we process, how do we understand a world where we have, it's been so long since peacetime? How do journalists cover this era when many people don't remember peacetime? The people who are now covering the news and who are very prominent, who were not really adults when we began going to war. In 2018, in the 2018 VSF survey, 18% of military and veteran families feel that the general public truly does not understand their sacrifices. Respondents want accurate, thoughtful media representations of modern military life. We are going to have a conversation about that with three people who can help give us some insight. The Director of Outreach at the U.S. Naval Institute, retired Navy Commander Ward Carroll, is up here. Fox News National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin, and Managing Editor at military.com, Hope Hivesek. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. So first, we'd like to thank, as every other moderator has, Kathy for the invitation. I've been a Kathy Roth-Douquet disciple since 2008, it's a pleasure. My post-Navy life is punctuated by Blue Star Family events. In fact, the only other time I've been in this room is another Blue Star Family event that we did with the Creative Coalition a few years ago. So it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm on the advisory board because I know that Kathy walks the walk. She's got a very unique hybrid background, as a White House staffer and as a military spouse. In fact, one of the Douquet family Sea Stories is the time I delivered a watch to her husband in Afghanistan during an embed I did when I was the editor of military.com. I thought I would see him in Kabul. I wound up running into him while he was heading a think tank junket in Paktika province. And so that's just something we bore people with when we were at different BSF events. So my first experience with the power of big media and its effect on the military is when I was a lieutenant on my second deployment. I was aboard the USS John F. Kennedy in one of the Tomcat squadrons. You guys remember the Tomcat, remember Top Gun, the greatest movie ever made? Maverick and Goose, I was Goose. I understand there's a sequel coming out. We were in port in Malaga, Spain, about to leave the Med and head back home. You know, and our countdown calendars were down to the single digits, and as anyone who's ever been deployed knows, that's a big deal, right? So we're calling our spouse and say, can't wait to see you, and it's gonna be great, it's been a good cruise, and so forth and so on. And all of a sudden, the spouses started informing us that Tom Brokaw had told them that we weren't coming home. In fact, we were sortying back to the Eastern Med because Terry Waite had been taken hostage. So my spouse knew before I did what my professional fortunes were going to be in the near term. Further, the brief had, or the report had said that they were uploading bombs on the airplanes on the flight deck. So this alarmed the families back home with the idea that war was imminent, which it turned out it was not. In fact, when we got to the Eastern Med, we pulled into port in Haifa, which sort of took the knife out of our teeth a little bit. And ultimately, it turned out to be a 2-week extension. But this was pre-internet days, and the idea of Tom Brokaw informing military families before we knew was shocking, to be honest. Fast forward a few years. 1998, I was the Air Wing Operations Officer aboard the USS George Washington. The strike group commander was Admiral Mike Mullen, later the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So Admiral Mullen was sitting in his stateroom conducting business. Now in 1998, we actually have news. In this case, it was CNN, sorry, Brand X. It was CNN was just in the background as he was conducting business. And a report came on. It said the USS George Washington is leaving Israel. We were in port in Haifa, going through the Suez and sortying to the Persian Gulf because Saddam is doing some saber rattling. So Admiral Mullen was like, Phone rings. It's Admiral Abbott, the 6th Fleet Commander for whom Admiral Mullen worked. And he says, Mike, here's some news. You're going to the Gulf. And Admiral Mullen said, I know. Christian Amanpour told me. So here we see, and that was the way back 1998 years, right? So the power of the mainstream media and big media is important. Now, two of the elements in the survey, one is 18% of respondents to the survey feel like the general public does not appreciate the sacrifice, right? Which is actually a waning trend, but it still exists. Part B, in terms of the resilience piece, is they feel like the information is not forthcoming from the sources that are tasked with giving military families information. So again, this is a tacit responsibility of the media. So Jennifer, let me start with you. Based on what I just said, how does that strike you in terms of your responsibilities, and how has your job changed since you first started at Fox News?
Well, thank you, Ward, and thank you, Kathy, for having us here today. I think what's really interesting, I've been at the Pentagon for 12 years. I was in the Middle East covering wars for Fox prior to that, but I arrived about 12 years ago, and my job has completely changed, as has that of the Pentagon Press Corps, which, as many of you know, the Pentagon Press Corps, we have some members of our press corps who've been covering the beat for 39 years. I mean, this is a embedded group of journalists who really have invested a lot of time and energy into military stories. But my job has completely changed in that 12 years. A lot of it has to do with social media, technology, and just the way information flows. When I first got to the Pentagon, we had press conferences. Probably every other day we would have a senior leader in the briefing room giving us briefings on whatever news was happening. The surge had just begun in Iraq, and so there was a lot to talk about. And I would get, and because we're here with Blue Star families, I would sometimes get calls or emails from family members of those deployed. I remember one time in particular when I started, and the Army had to announce that they were going to extend deployments to 15 months from 12 months. And that was, that was like dropping a bomb in the middle of the Pentagon courtyard. And we had the ability we had a press conference coming up, and so I was asked by a family member to press the Army leadership on that issue. And so we would take information, people knew how to email us and get information out there. We felt that we were serving military families as much as we were serving the American people, and also in asking these questions at press conferences. Well, fast forward 12 years, and what we're finding is that public affairs officers and the services are relying more and more. They realize the power of social media, so they're relying on Twitter to communicate with us. So they are putting out press releases and information through Twitter. If we want to know what's happening in the Middle East, or if there's been an incident or an incident where a Russian jet has buzzed one of our planes somewhere, we get it through Twitter. But what it doesn't allow us to do, we can't ask follow-up questions, we can't get the context, we're losing the human interaction with the public affairs officers, many of whom are here in this audience right now. I see two of the best here, Dave LePan and Joe Plensler, who I've worked with for years when they were at the Marines and in the chairman's office. And we're losing that human interaction where what the military did so well in the first Gulf War was to build the relationship with journalists so that they embedded us with the military. They embedded us, and there was a huge ability for us to storytell from within the military. I feel like we are losing that right now, and we're being tweeted at rather than talked to, and we're losing the ability to ask questions. Just a quick aside, I've often said that my job has changed so much that I spend more time keeping news off the air than getting news on the air. And that's because our adversaries, as well as our military at times, our own government, people have realized they can use the media to get information into the bloodstream. And a great incident, a great example of that a few days ago, I spent all morning trying to debunk a story that had started. I was asked to match, and all the other journalists on the hall in the Pentagon were asked to match a story about an F-15, an American F-15 that had been buzzed over the Black Sea by a Russian warplane. And it's a very dramatic description in the Daily Mail. It was published, videos were published in here. You click on the link in the Daily Mail, and it turns out that the story was a year old, but we couldn't tell because it was on the exact same day a year earlier. And then we figured out that the Russians had put this out through a Twitter bot, and so the Daily Mail had picked it up, linked to a story that was a year old, and suddenly, but it took several hours to debunk that. And so we're in an age where information flows quickly, fake news gets into the bloodstream, but that's how my job has changed. I feel like I'm keeping news off the air more than getting it on. And I want to turn to Hope and not take up too much time.
So the one addendum to Hope's bio is she's the mother of a 10-week-old. So congratulations, Hope. So how, just ponying on what Jennifer just was talking about, how has your focus and job changed over the span of your professional journalism career?
Well, the first job I ever held in journalism, I still feel was one of my most important. And that was the local beat reporter at the Daily News of Jacksonville, North Carolina. And, yes.
All
if
this
you know
Marine
it, you know what.
Corps-centric stuff here.
Exactly. And at the time, I was a 21-year-old cub reporter. That was the average age of everyone in that town. So my friends and neighbors were deploying, or they were home with 3 kids at 21, and their spouse was deploying. That was the reality. And you know, moving to DC is progressively getting away from that. I want to make 2 quick points because I know we're running out of time. The first is that it's very easy to turn military life into a cliche that's very palatable for a civilian audience, and I think that's part of the disconnect. When I talk to my civilian friends about those homecoming videos that are always going viral everywhere, they're like, oh yeah, it made me cry, it felt so good. And the response from my friends who are military family members, it's a little more complex because it's a personal moment. It's something that is just a tiny iceberg of a much bigger story. So I see part of my job as kind of getting beyond the cliches and really getting to the meat of what is the military experience now. And I've got to tell you to kind of pinball off of what Jennifer said, it's getting a lot harder to get that story told, and it's harder to get active duty service members to talk to us under any circumstances. So military family members are absolutely the secret weapon here, because you can talk more, you can reach out to us, you can have conversations, you can tell us what's going on in ways that we might not be aware, or ways that you're affected, that unintended consequences that we're not aware of. It's a real treat to be in this job. Last time I was in Kuwait about a year ago, I bumped into a friend who I had no idea he was deployed there, and it really kind of hit home to me. I know how he's doing, and his wife Krystal, who I know as well. My information is more up to date than hers right now, and so that's a real privilege to be in that role. And I really encourage military family members, make use of us, reach out, tell us your stories, and help us to tell the world.
So we're looking forward to the conversation about increasing economic opportunities for our military spouses. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I cannot tell you how thrilled I am to be here to chat about a topic I hold very dear to my heart, as Ms. Millie alluded to. I'm an Army spouse, of 10 years, coming up on my 7th move. I am intimately familiar with the obstacles that are associated with trying to find long-term, meaningful employment and the loss of identity that goes with this nomadic lifestyle. But today's military spouses have really evolved. And with that too, so has the expectation to be able to work. And our data shows us that. Spouse Force is a tool that we use for our employment program. It's an interactive tool for military spouses. And that data tells us that 60% of respondents have a bachelor's degree or higher. 11% have some kind of a security clearance. And let me tell you, they are 100% ready to work. So here to talk more about that today, Senator Kaine and Pat O'Chan. Senator Kaine, among a million things, sits on several committees. He is on the Armed Services, Budget, and Foreign Relations Committee, as well as Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Alongside him is Pat O'Chan. She is a Marine veteran spouse and a senior consultant in policy with Booz Allen Hamilton. I told you she was smart. She sits on the advisory board with Blue Star Families, and as if it's no big deal, she's currently pursuing her PhD. They live in Arlington with their 8-year-old son. So welcome, panelists. So it's no secret, probably to those in this room, that military spouse employment has been an issue for a while. Now, Senator Kaine, your bill is one that addresses this from a much more comprehensive sort of way. But before we get into the details, can you talk to us a bit about how these issues came to your attention?
Absolutely, Beth. Hey, it's great to be with you guys today, and I want to thank Blue Star Families and all of you for doing this. What an important thing, and it's good to be back with Pat. I'll tell a funny story about how I met her the first time. So I'm on the Armed Services Committee. And when I came to the Senate in 2013, a passion of mine was getting the veterans unemployment rate, which was at that point nearly twice the national average for an enlisted Iraq and Afghan veteran, to get it below the national average. And so my first bill was called the Troop Talent Act in 2013, and all of us worked together on that. Private sector, policymakers, we did a lot of stuff together. Both Obama and Trump administrations were doing a lot. And guess what? The veterans unemployment rate is now less than the national average. So we can move the needle if we care. It was about 2 years ago, I was doing a roundtable with military spouses at Thomas Nelson Community College in Newport News about healthcare costs, TRICARE, military health care, et cetera. But the spouses kept bringing up employment issues. And one of the spouses said to me something like this: the unemployment rate among military spouses is 3 to 5 times the national average. So not double the national average, but 3 to 5 times. Now I thought the imprecision of that comment was interesting. And so I went back to my office, and I have a great staffer here, Blake Suter, who's been really the key to this. And I said, well, is that true? And why is it 3 to 5 times the national average? Can't you be more specific? It turns out you measure what you care about. We care about the veterans' unemployment rate. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics every month in the work that they do, they ask, are you a veteran or not? But they don't ask, are you a military spouse? So the data isn't good. The Blue Star Family Survey data is about the best data that we have. And there's other bits of data too, but we don't have the long set of data every month, track it really carefully, because we haven't cared enough to track it. But it immediately appeared to me, of course, all the same issues that make veterans unemployment for military spouses, frequent moves, credentialing challenges. Holly Ann was talking about her, as a nurse moving here, there, real estate agent, cosmetologist, elementary school teacher, attorney, as you're moving state to state. People think, wow, you're really qualified, but you're going to move soon. So or a lot of military communities are, you might be lucky enough to be in a metropolitan area, or you might be in a place where there aren't a lot of other jobs. It sort of dawned on me, of course this is a problem. I'm the last remaining senator with a child in the military, and he's married. I have a military spouse as a daughter-in-law. But I hadn't fully thought about all of this until these great military spouses around the table in a meeting about healthcare told me I needed to broaden my focus. And so working together, we put this bill in and had just great support, Blue Star families. Our spouses really wrote the bill. I mean, I'll give Blake a little bit of credit, but it was the spouses' stories. Okay, there's a child care component to this. There's a training and counseling component. There's a credentialing component. There's different components. There's no silver bullet that's going to solve it. But my punchline is, if we took the veterans' unemployment rate from double the national average to less than the national average, we can do the same thing. We can do the same thing with the military spouse unemployment rate if we devote the same attention to it.
I appreciate that. I love so many things about that, but the one thing I love the most is just ask a military spouse what's what, and they will tell you. Senator or not, they'll let you know. So Pat, as a military spouse, what have been your experiences with kind of in relation to military spouse employment?
So my husband, thank you, by the way, for having me on this panel. And Senator, it's great to see you again. So my husband served in the United States Marine Corps and had things going for him. But while he was serving, I also had things going for me. And so our family was really doing well. Then down along the road, he got injured in combat, which obviously changed everything. So my role changed from being, full-time employee to caregiver, overnight. And that raises a whole other lot of issues itself. So I've worked so hard to help my husband make sure he's doing well. I've seen so much progress. We still have a lot of work to do, but it takes one day at a time. So anyways, when I got ready to go back to work, the biggest challenge and biggest frustration was explaining the gaps in my resume. I was so tired of going to employers and being asked, what are the gaps in your resume? Why can you explain this? And then when you even explain those gaps, they're not really willing to listen. They're not paying attention. So anyways, the gaps is a huge thing. Then another thing is, when you're a naturalized citizen, you're going to be asked, oh, it's going to be difficult to get a security clearance. We can't hire you. Or they will look at your schooling and say, you're overqualified. All these reasons, So I almost gave up, but then Blue Star families came in, helped me revamp my, resume, make it fresh, sent me to volunteering opportunities, and, brought my caregiving skills to light, translated what I've been doing to what the market needs. And then guess what? A huge opportunity showed up with Senator Elizabeth Dole, who is a caregiver, chief caregiver herself. She invites me to this opportunity to meet Booz Allen Hamilton executives to share my challenges. And they listened. For the first time, I felt the presence in the room. These people listened and actually asked me what it would look like to have, what would my schedule for their company look like. So I had the opportunity to explain exactly what I thought would work for Patricia. But I also thought about all the other caregivers who are looking for employment and brought in the flexibility and all that stuff. So I'll never forget Sue Penfeld, who is one of the executives in Booz Allen, said one thing that has always remained in my head. She said, first of all, she thanked Senator Elizabeth Dole, and then she said, you know, Patricia, we have had you, we are Booz Allen Hamilton, and we are going to do something. At that moment, I felt this is what every caregiver wants to hear from employers. This is what we long for from you. You know, we come to you, by the time we come up to you, we know what our family situation is. We've worked so hard to make this work, and we want you to work with us to make this work. In fact, you should include in your interview questions what works for you. And you will be surprised at what we've discovered that will do so well for your companies.
Thank you, Pat. But fantastic insight, and I think a lot of inspiration for the spouses in the audience to know that these organizations are starting to listen to us. Senator Kaine, for those in the room that may not be very familiar with the bill that you recently passed, can you talk a little bit about how it addresses military spouse employment?
Absolutely, and it's called the Military Spouse Employment Act of 2018. And again, no silver bullets, so we want more ideas. Every year, the one bill I can guarantee the Senate will pass when we even are divided about a Mother's Day resolution is the National Defense Authorizing Act. And since we will always pass that bill, things like this can get introduced and then put into the bill. So we worked very closely with Kathy and others. I met Pat first at an event that Blue Star Families and the Northern Virginia Technology Council did about military spouse employment. And from listening to them, we put together a bill that has 4 basic components to just respond to concerns. One is easier access to employment opportunities. So sometimes some of the best jobs around military bases are federal jobs. And so if you can expedite hiring or make it easier to be hired or get a preference hiring if you're a military spouse, that's an obvious one that we should be able to do. So we included that in the bill. Second, we had a dynamic military spouse entrepreneur, Lakeisha Cole, who was former Military Spouse of the Year, who's an entrepreneur, and she always wanted to, like, in an unused part of the PX on a base, open a kiosk to sell crafts, and found that, you know, you almost have to get the SecDef to sign off to do something like that. So we tried to push in this bill easier ability for spouses to do on-base opportunities, even entrepreneurial opportunities. That should be something that's easier. So the employment deals with that. Education and training. Making sure that the My Career Advancement account is broadened in its use. So not just for taking a class, but for credentialing costs, broaden the group of people who are able to access My CAA. That's really important. Childcare. Childcare was the obstacle for many, not being able to find reasonably priced childcare on or near bases. And so without compromising on the quality of people who would be hired to do childcare, we tried to expedite processes for hiring childcare workers on bases to give military spouses more ability to find affordable childcare. And then finally, counseling and coaching. So the Military One Source program, for example, you can access it 6 months after you depart. We changed that to a year. Because the transition to civilian life, 6 months is actually not that long. And one that we're continuing to work on is the TAP program, Transition Assistance Program. That program is guaranteed for the military member, space available for the spouse. And we want it to be guaranteed for the military member and the spouse, because transition's a family thing. It's not just for the member, it's for the family. So those are the kinds of issues that we dealt with in the bill.
That's fantastic. We're running a bit tight on time, so I want to thank you both so much for your comments. I think as was displayed here, military spouse is a solvable problem, but it really does need a multi-pronged solution, right? Pat mentioned corporations. Senator Kaine talked about the things the federal government is doing to support. So for all of you in the audience who are hiring managers or decision makers, if you want to take a look at the data we referred to earlier about spouses inside Spouse Force, let me know. Military spouses in the audience, if you have not completed your profile on Spouse Force, please do, because this whole thing works so much better when we all work together. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great panel. Thanks to Senator Kane for being here. Okay, we are going to move on to our next conversation. Okay, yes. All right, here we go. We're going to move on. Humans are communal beings. We need to belong to a community. We know that need is not being met for many military families, many of their family members at the community level. The 2018 BSF survey revealed 48% of military family respondents feel they don't belong in their local civilian communities. Isolation has consistently been a top 5 stressor. Blue Star families and other organizations are coming together to forge stronger partnerships among civilian communities and the military and veteran families that reside in them. Please welcome the CEO of Psych Armor Institute and Blue Star Family's former Director of Community Solutions, Dr. Tina Atherall. Okay, nice to work with you. You're like, go ahead. Joining her is Renee Bardoff. Renee Bardoff. And Starbucks Regional Director of Operations, TJ Wolfersberger. TJ. Oh, and Jason Pack. There's a story behind that. So Jason, welcome. I'm glad that you're here also.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, in preparing for this, I think that we have like the best seat in the house because we get to wrap this up and also keep all of you awake. But first of all, I would just like to thank Blue Star Families for the opportunity to sit here and moderate this panel. This has definitely been an incredible journey over the last 2.5 years, really 3 years, I'd say, since the annual survey started to indicate a really significant issue around military family, military social isolation. So I'm really thrilled to be here to share the work that we've all done collectively over the last several years. As well, I just want to recognize the thought leadership behind the applied research team, Hisako and Jen and her team. If you think about what the word means, applied research, this is our opportunity to challenge all of you to really apply this research to a programmatic, data-driven programmatic innovation. And that's what Connected Communities is going to demonstrate here today. And our panelists are going to share with you the impactful ways in which they joined arms with Blue Star Families around the data and is creating a really innovative community model that's going to create significant change in regards to military isolation. So thank you again, everyone. And I'm really excited to introduce my panelists here. And we kind of agreed as a small group that you all know how to read, so we're not going to go into their bios. We have a lot that we want to talk about. But again, we'd like to say hello to Renee Bardoff, who is the Senior Vice President for Government and Community Relations at Wounded Warrior Project. When I think about social connections, I would guess that all of you in this room know the long, amazing work that Renee Bardoff has done in this community for military families, wounded, ill, and injured. So again, a great example of what social connections and whatnot demonstrates here. I'm gonna go in line here. This is TJW, just by the way, that's the other. So yeah, we're shortening up. The Regional Director of Operations at Starbucks. And then we have Jason Pack. I actually got something off that's not on your bio that Renee told me that you went to West Point, correct? So at one time I was a neighbor of yours. So anyways, so he is the Senior Manager, Veterans Initiatives and Outreach at the Boeing Company. So again, just to be short on time, the one thing that I want to share around the Connected Communities project that we're going to talk about here today is that it really stemmed once again from looking at a theoretical model and saying, in all of this that you guys talked about here today around connectedness, we have a heightened alert around that sense of belonging. What is that really about? It's about your social networks, and we've talked a lot today around what does military families connections look like. So this model is a visionary model saying that if military families are connected to their community, we're going to see an increase in their well-being, and back to our last panel, an increase in their social capital. How do you guys get your jobs, right? It's your social networks. So our panelists today here have invested in that model, but also they're invested in that in many different ways in the community. I'm going to start with Renee, just looking at the social isolation component. I'm going to my cards. I want Hisaka to be very proud of me that I'm staying focused with my cards. Could you talk about this approach around collective impact and the importance for Wounded Warrior Project and other organizations in this space? What does partnerships look like for Wounded Warrior Project? And also, why is it important for organizations like yours to work collectively to connect military and veteran families in their local community?
Okay, so I think what most people know about Wounded Warrior Project is really about the Wounded Warriors and the direct service that we provide to those individuals. A lot of people don't know that we have an advocacy arm, but then one of the most important things that we do is our investment portfolio and encouraging collaboration and partnership in the space. And so just in 2018 alone, we invested $13.6 million into 38 other organizations that are doing amazing work in the space. Almost all of those 38 organizations are represented in this room. And one of the reasons why Blue Star Families is such a great partner is because Kathy believes what we believe, what I believe for decades now, that no one organization can do it alone. We all have very important missions and direct services that we provide to our service members, veterans, and their families, but it doesn't fill all the gaps, and we know this. So why not come together and join forces? And so one of the things that we're invested in is Kathy and Blue Star Families Connecting Communities. We've initially invested in 4 communities, and it's about bringing warriors out, connecting them to the services, other groups that we're invested in, whether it's Team Rubicon, or it's Team Red, White, and Blue, or it's EDF if they're a caregiver, in employment opportunities, whether it's at Comcast or Boeing or Starbucks. Ensuring that we're putting a safety net and creating networks for warriors and their families, their spouses, in local communities in order to help them be successful and doing it together instead of siloed. So for us, it is the only way to do business now. It's to partner together with government, with the private sector on the for-profit side, and people who care, and also on the nonprofit side.
Great, thank you. It's really developing that military family ecosystem too, which is really unique. And I can say, as working as a part of Renee's team, there are the ability to work together with partners on an implementation. So who's the programmatic people in the room? Any programmatic people here? Okay, good. So you know how hard, like, we come up with these great ideas, but when it really comes down to implementation, it takes a team. And when we're talking about this model, to Renee's point, you can't do it alone. And so to have a leader like this within Wounded Warrior Project to say, okay, we're behind you, but we're gonna do this together, and really lead by that example, and all the teams are together, has really made it an effective approach. So thank you. Okay, so we're gonna move over to you, Jason. We're skipping out. We're saving the coffee for last. So I just wanna highlight a couple things around the information that you'll find in this year's annual survey, which I think is really interesting, is that loss of connection as one of the top transition issues, right? But one of the things that I thought was interesting as we looked at this is how the respondents said that they felt that there was an increasingly appreciation by the general civilian population. And that they did feel as though 19% felt that the general population understood the sacrifices. So what this leads to is we wanted to talk about that corporate social responsibility model. And in particular, as it relates to the connected communities, we found that individuals like Boeing in particular, when it came to connected communities, their employees wanted to be involved with military families as well. So not only from a giving standpoint, but from an action standpoint. So Jason, what are some of the key benefits that you have seen in your organization and for the military and veteran communities since starting corporate engagement?
Thank you so much, Tina. Again, I'm sorry for being a little bit delayed. I kind of gave you a heart attack there, not showing up. But I made it, and I just want to say, thank you to Blue Star families and everybody here that's in attendance. We are absolutely honored to be a part of this mission. Boeing is a very large company, right? We have 150,000 plus employees in over 120 different countries around the world, and 20,000 plus veterans within our workforce. That's nearly 13 to 15%-ish. And so with that in mind, employee engagement is huge for us. When I first came into the company about 4 years ago, I'll share with you all that, believe it or not, from a corporate philanthropy standpoint, a focus area, supporting military veterans and their families was not its own priority area. It was a subcategory of health and human services. And so, since then, it's been transformed, we've evolved, and now it is one of our two actually main priorities and why we are so active in this space. I mean, just think about it, a company like Boeing, normally in the general population, you hear Boeing, you'll think 737, 787, but the defense part of the company, the military customer, 40% of our business is dedicated to that area as well. And so it's part of who we are. It's part of our identity. I was an Army guy. Tina, as you mentioned earlier, I went to West Point, so flew around in Chinooks and worked with Apaches downrange in Afghanistan, and those are all Boeing products. And so when we talk about, what are the key benefits of helping this demographic, it's not just because it's, to be honest, charity. It's just the right thing to do. It's part of our enduring values to make sure that we are not only making world-class products, but also ensuring that those users of those products are taken care of when they come back home and in their transition. And what I'll expand upon a little bit is, over the years, I feel like there has been an inherent focus on assisting the transitioning individual service member, right? And often when I take on meetings with certain organizations that want to partner with the company, hey, we're doing this for the service member, we're doing that for the service member, and then what are you doing for the family? I come from a military family as well. My father was in the Army, and seeing what my mother went through as a military spouse, she was an opera singer, but she struggled with moving 5, 6, 7, 8 times internationally. And so it's ingrained in my mind, and it's always something that I do ask for potential partnerships and what you're doing more for the spouses, the family, the children, because we understand, and I know from personal experience coming out of Walter Reed and being injured downrange, that if it wasn't for the family component, if it wasn't for my sister, my mother, my father, people around me, then I wouldn't be where I'm at today. And I know it's evident, regardless if you're wounded or not, the transition is difficult. And having that support structure in place will ensure that you get from point A to point B, and our company is behind that credo. So.
Great, thank you. So you're talking about your mom and the opera singer. I just happen to think about all the amazing military spouses out there that get the honor of singing the national anthem because somewhere along the line that they heard that they were either on Broadway or whatnot, right? They're like, that's their next stint. But so I'm going to connect this in 2 different ways and then actually kind of throw you in for something that we talked about around employment and the caregivers and stuff. But if TJ, if you could expand one on the community engagement part, because I know at Blue Star Families we were directly the world is set on fire when we can go into a coffee house anywhere, a Starbucks anywhere, and start a conversation, whether it's with other neighbors or it's with military groups or caregiver groups or employment. Could you talk about that initiative in particular around the coffee? I say coffee, and I'm so sorry, but I'm like the ultimate Starbucks person. But could you talk about that engagement, and then also to our point that we talked about around employment?
Yeah, definitely. Just want to say thank you for the amazing partnership with Blue Star Families. And when I think about innovation and partnerships, really I think of it as co-creation. And so most recently, for example, on Veterans Day, we came together at 140 locations. Blue Star Families brought volunteers out, and we donated 15 cents per cup back to Blue Star Families to help expand these connected communities that we have. And as an organization, we find ourselves in this unique position to be a third place where people can come together and bridge the gap that we've spoken about all day today. And as an employer, we find that our role and responsibility is to be an example for others to follow. And we talked about military spouses, and one example of that would be partnering with Care.com and offering childcare services that are subsidized. And our military spouses and our veteran partners have shared just how important that is. Another example would be the Starbucks College Achievement Plan with Arizona State University. And in that example, a veteran can give not only themselves a college education, but also gift one to a family member. And as I look at the survey results around financial security, providing college education for your children is something that is incredibly expensive. And so those are just a few ways that as an organization we use innovation and these great partnerships like we have with Blue Star Families to really make a difference in our community.
Thank you. Renee, could you talk about the initiatives that you have around spouse employment and caregivers?
Yes, so again, it's all about partnerships. We have a wonderful partnership with the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, our caregiver program. As you might expect, most caregivers of severely wounded warriors are part of the Wounded Warrior Project, and they have very unique needs, not just in employment, but in all areas. But we recently did a collaborative grant together with Blue Star Families and the Chamber on hiring of spouses and caregivers, which we think is a wonderful way, again, for groups to come together. And I'm sure Steve will volunteer to be a part of any initiative that we do in terms of employment of caregivers. But we're taking that on, and we're taking it on because of the data that we see, what we see in our survey, what Blue Star Families sees. And I'd like to just make a shout out to organizations like Boeing, like Starbucks, like Comcast and USAA, and those who aren't just doing this for charity. It's because they actually really care about our community. And don't forget either that it is the US government, you know, as we saw in the shutdown, veterans were disproportionately impacted by the shutdown and the impacts of the shutdown. And why is that? It's because the US government hires our veterans, and we have made sure that in the Department of Defense that we give priority to our veterans and also to spouses. And so people ought to keep that in mind, that the government is always an option for you, and it's also something that's really transferable. I was a young Marine Corps spouse, started in Jacksonville, just like Hope. You know, I was a little graphic artist that I left my hometown of Boston, a great job in an ad agency, and next thing I knew, I was doing flyers for the O Club. And you know, and I felt really
And
proud.
Hope was doing the stories.
You know, a $10 an hour job, and you know, but then the Marine Corps helped me when I got to Quantico. They helped me transition to Quantico, and then I transitioned to another duty station, and the Marine Corps helped me there. And I learned a lot about everything I know now and what it means to take care of families and how many organizations and companies are out there to help us. And I'm really thankful for that. And had I not known that perhaps I would have been better off to transition as a government employee, you know, I may not be sitting where I am today.
I love the approach that you take too, because it is cross-sector, right? So one of the challenges in looking at this pilot that we've had, and it really has been a design iteration, and so any of you that are going to take the great next bit of data and think about designing something around it, remember, you're going to have to test it and evaluate it and test it and evaluate it. So one of the things we heard was at first we started just around connections, like thinking that Renee's connections within her community was enough, and we've learned that it's not. It's also around belongingness. And so this model also has to change with that, and our partners here are helping us by doing that, by investing in the model and knowing that it's going to be a round of iteration. So again, if you would just be sticking in one sector and around just even our Marine Corps relationships, that would have become limited. Though I am laughing that when Hope got up here, I was like, I know her, and now I know why. It was Jacksonville. So I have 2 minutes left. Do I have enough time for one more question? Okay, good. So I'm going to toss out the idea around innovation, right? And I know that we all call, oh, what? Are you afraid I'm going to keep talking? Okay, good. I know. My Blue Star friends and family are thinking, oh God, they gave her the mic. But we'll keep it rolling. Of course, I love innovation. And I think it's all a definition of what innovation is. But I'd like to toss back to all of you thinking about, we should be thinking 5 years, 10 years ahead of where we are. Could you talk about maybe some of the things related to, even if it's something that you heard today, that you might have written down that you're going to go back and say, we got to look at this, we got to challenge our partners, we got to look at our organizations and move forward. So again, to maybe even be ahead of moving the needle, be ahead of that needle. Any thoughts around innovating? And I know I just threw that at you like we didn't practice this one.
So I know this is really important to all 3 of our organizations, just as as funders. I speak as a funder now and not with the hat of, where most of the spend of Wounded Warrior Project is in direct service, is really on the return on investment and the metrics and measuring the successes of programs out there and the successes of the partnerships and ensuring that they are indeed where we should be placing these limited resources, and that we're able to take those and turn it into action. So we go to people like Tony Curta, and we actually have the data to back it up. So if Kathy was only doing community connections and spouse employment, and she wasn't doing the survey, or if we weren't doing the survey at Wounded Warrior Project, it would be very difficult for me to go to DoD and then actually impact policy so that we could change it for every single family instead of one at a time. And I know as a funder, and you guys can probably talk to that, the metrics piece is really, really important to the investor.
For me, I would share that one of the things I'm going to take away was shared earlier around the certification program at Starbucks. We do have resources and materials, and Blue Star Family has been such an integral part of this for us around training and educating our civilian partners on how to interview in a way that a veteran's response parallels a response we would look for in the retail sector. And to have a certification program, I think, is fantastic. And with our partnership with ASU, it's definitely something that I'll bring back to the broader team because I know that we can make a big difference in shrinking that divide together.
Yeah, I think, Renee, you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about an ROI, and in terms of innovation, Boeing is always wanting to be an innovative company. That's it's our mantra. It's an often a common term that we hear in the workplace. So when we talk about long-term outcomes, that is what we are looking for. A common word that I like to use a lot in discussions internally within my organization or with potential partners is maximizing your impact and being creative and being collaborative in those types of proposals, per se, if you want to address a certain issue within the community. And when you can draw out 5 years, 10 years, what the impact is going to be and articulate that clearly to potential funders, I would say that is what will spark a light bulb in us, and we would want to hear more about that. The other piece that I would like to say is the collaborative piece. When you talk about different organizations and the abundance of veteran service organizations that are out there, there's a lot of overlap and redundancies that occur, right? And the ones that I tend to like to seek out are the ones that say, hey, we are working with this partner and that partner, and together, in essence, we are going to make a larger impact. And so, that kind of veers away from the innovation question, but when you're talking about long-term outcomes and sustained outcomes, then you go into the debate about quality over quantity, right? Before, larger corporations like to put themselves behind, hey, what is the most people that you're touching through your programs, right? If it's 10,000 versus 1,000, we want to go with the 10,000, regardless of whether or not it's quality programming. That is changing. We are really emphasizing, obviously, the quantitative component and making sure your programs are touching the people it needs to touch, but also ensuring that those programs are quality and they're long-term and they're sustainable, and it's something that we want to get behind, right? So I don't know what the right answer is when we talk about the quality or quantity debate, but I would say a good mix of both would be the right kind of approach. Sorry.
Great, thank you. No, that's awesome, and I think we're gonna round it up. But real quick for questions, but before we do, I just wanna say also, as we're talking about connected communities, and as you think about ways that you'll challenge your organizations or your funders, or if you are a funder, I just wanna give a shout out. I know they're not here today, but Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation in the initial stages of connected communities invested in the fact that this model needed to have evaluation in it. And so they did fund that. So that's really important. Everyone wants impact, but you need to be able to help these organizations fund that evaluation piece, because we know that you guys are looking for it, so please help us in funding that piece too. So do we have any questions out there before we wrap this up and move to closing out the day? Yeah, okay.
just wanted to mention, my name is Krystal Anderson. I'm actually the 2018 Armed Forces Insurance Military Spouse of the Year. And you know, we talk a lot about, you know, I guess going back to spouse employment, but connecting in communities. We have a virtual community that's really important because we have spouses all over the world from every branch. And with that, you know, through my 5-6 years, or actually probably 10 years of volunteer service, I never thought to actually put that on my resume because I didn't get paid for it. And a lot of your companies have mentioned how that's really important. You know, don't just think about your paid employment. And through that, I had the opportunity, actually, just over the past year, I just started with Army Emergency Relief. And General Mason, we talked about, you know, a role that I could play. And I said, yeah, I'd love to, that would be great. He said, and we'd like to pay you for it. And I thought, really? That's interesting, that's amazing. But with that, leveraging partners and just becoming a part of the communities, not just within our FRGs as military spouses, but larger communities throughout with all of the branches, because it's pretty amazing once we kind of get together how many resources are available to us, and we can connect. For example, the Schultz Family Foundation I connected with a few months ago, and talked about opportunities there. So I think it's important to, when we talk about partners, not only that, but the spouse spaces as well.
Excellent, great point, thank you. Does anyone have anything to follow up on that, or no? Okay.
I guess I would just reinforce what you said about incorporating your volunteerism into your resume of experiences. In fact, this morning we were just reviewing a vacancy that we had in our organization, and we took special attention to ensuring that the experience level we would include both paid and unpaid work, which is something that's really important to all of us who have gone through that process of being a spouse. In some places it just wasn't viable to get a paid employment, or perhaps we just really believed in something. I know there was one project I did, had a great job at Headquarters Marine Corps, and decided with a bunch of other spouses, we all quit our jobs to start a nonprofit. And it was scary and risky, and but it ended up enormously successful, and I would never not put that on my resume now, because I'm really proud of who they are and where they are today. So please do that.
All right, well, time's up. Okay, Susie. All right, well, thank you to the three of you for sharing in this conversation, for leading the innovative example, and as well as trusting in this Connected Communities project within communities. I mean, they started off in 2, then 3 within, I think, the first year, and now scaling to 10, unless that's grown. And that's all been by your efforts. So thank you to the three of you for spending some time, and thank you for all of you, and look forward to seeing what you guys bring to the table next year after this conversation. So thanks so much.
All right, so that brings us to the end of our time together. It's sad. I just want to say I have known Kathy Roth-Douquet since before she was a military spouse, when we were both involved in U.S. politics together. And it is amazing for me to see the passion and commitment she had to service from that period of her life being transferred to this period of her life in this community, and all the work that you guys have been doing at Blue Star Families. So thank you again for having me. It was my pleasure to be here, and I hope you all have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Jamal. And I told him he is now drafted for all future events that we do. Wasn't he great? Thank you, Jamal. We imagined the coolest people that we could possibly invite and have the nerve to ask to come up and help us tell our story. And we can't believe how many of you all said yes. So the folks who are on this stage, so incredible today. So grateful for all of our moderators and our speakers and our panelists. We are really a crowdfunding, crowdsourcing organization. All the things we do, people thanked me a lot, and that was really totally inappropriate, because the people who did all the work are all of you who are in here and our staff who are in the room. If the people who are Blue Star Family staff members could raise their hands. Such a great job. Sheila Stevens and Mebbe in particular for the event, our incredible applied research team. You met Hisako already, and Jen Hurwitz, and some of our great contractors. The beautiful, and I want to mention, we have military spouses who are research professionals who craft these survey questions and field the survey together with our incredible partners at IVMF. We couldn't do it without IVMF, but it is actually done in-house. So I think it's wonderful to know that the beautiful graphics that you see done by military spouses who are a part of Blue Star Families teams created that stuff in-house. So it is a real crowdsourced organization. We want to make this really meaningful and useful to you. We do the survey for our sake, but we also do it to help tell the story and to help all of you do your excellent work. You helped us to design the questions. You helped us to field them. Let us know how we're doing and if we are making it as useful as possible for you. If this format was helpful or if other things were different, we want to serve you, because we know by serving you, we serve our community. So please help us with that. I have to acknowledge our amazing sponsors. Again, USAA, who's our major sponsor here, but also Lockheed Martin, CXX Corporation, Facebook, American Red Cross, BAE Systems, Northrop Grumman, Walmart Foundation, our media partner, military.com, and some of the other funders you saw up here today. None of this happens without that kind of broad-based support. Thank you for sticking with us today. Again, I hope it was good for you. It was great for us. We appreciate all you do.